Welcome, traveler. Wherever you are, perhaps resting after a long day, or watching in the quiet stillness of the night, I'm glad you're here. Take a moment to slow down, to breathe, and to let the noise of the present fade away. Before we begin our journey into the ancient world, I invite you to subscribe, like, and leave a comment telling us where and what time you're watching from. It helps this channel grow and keeps stories like this alive. Stories of forgotten hands, lost cities, and the quiet rhythm of history. Now, close your eyes if you wish. We're going somewhere far away to the cradle of civilization, where every empire began with a single brick. You are standing in the heat of the Mesopotamian plain, where the horizon wavers in the thick air like a reflection on water. The city of Babylon stretches before you, its walls vast and shimmering with baked clay, its towers layered like the steps of a dream. To the casual eye, it is a city of power, of kings and gods. But if you walk closer, if you listen carefully, you can hear another sound beneath the hymns to Marduk and the marching of soldiers, the steady rhythm of mud being shaped by human hands. That sound is the making of empire. The bricks that built Babylon were not conjured by kings, nor were they divine gifts from the gods. They were made by ordinary men, women, and slaves, who spent their lives pressing river mud into wooden molds, mixing straw into clay, and stacking each piece of earth to dry beneath the endless sun. It was slow work. It was dull work. But it was the foundation of everything. Temples, palaces, granaries, walls. Without bricks, Babylon would have remained a name written in dust. In this land between the Tigris and Euphrates, stone was rare, wood was precious, clay was abundant. The river gave it freely, in thick deposits that glistened after the floods. The people of ancient Mesopotamia learned early that this clay could be shaped, dried, and made into something that endured. It began with small huts and ovens, then walls, then ziggurats, the great terraced temples that climbed toward the heavens, built not for comfort, but for cosmic order. A Babylonian brickmaker, somewhere around 600 BCE, might have worked in a field outside the city walls. The process began with digging, long trenches cut into the riverbank, where silt and clay mixed naturally. Water was added by hand, poured from clay jars. The mixture was kneaded with bare feet until it became heavy and smooth, like bread dough. Chopped straw or chaff was added to bind it, prevent cracking. The molds were simple, rectangular frames, roughly 30 centimeters long, laid on the ground. Into these molds, the wet clay was packed firmly, then smoothed over with a wooden plank. Each brick was then marked, not by the maker, but by the king. On the upper surface, a cuneiform stamp would be pressed, declaring ownership: Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, provider of the great temple. It was a statement of control, carved into every block of earth. For every magnificent wall, there were tens of thousands of these stamped bricks, laid one by hands that history does not remember. The laborers toiled under supervisors who recorded production on clay tablets. Archaeologists have found some of these tablets, lists of workers, quantities of bricks, and rations of barley and beer. Most workers were paid not in silver, but in food and shelter. Some were slaves, taken from conquered lands. Others were citizens working under state obligation, fulfilling their labor duty to the temple or crown. The workday began at sunrise and ended when the light failed. The heat was constant, the air thick with insects. The river's edge was muddy, the ground uneven. Yet the rhythm of the task offered a strange consistency. The same mixture, the same mold, the same gesture repeated thousands of times. The brickmaker's life, like the city he built, was one of endless repetition. When you walk among the ruins today, the remains of the Ishtar Gate, the broken outlines of the great ziggurat of Etemenanke, you can still see the faint inscriptions on bricks. They all bear the same royal marks, but none show the fingerprints of the hands that made them. Those were pressed out by water, time, and forgetfulness. And yet, through these bricks, the anonymous workers achieved a kind of immortality. Their bodies have vanished, their names erased, but their labor remains in the very geometry of history. Each brick tells of human endurance, of a civilization built on patience rather than brilliance. The brickmaker's tools were simple: a shovel, a mold, a wooden paddle, and the sun. The entire system of Babylonian architecture depended on timing. The drying period had to be exact. Too little sun, and the bricks would crumble. Too much, and they would warp or crack. Some were left to dry naturally, others were fired in kilns for strength. Firing required fuel, reeds, brushwood, sometimes dung, which meant that only the most important projects used baked bricks. Most buildings used sun-dried ones, weaker but faster to make. The rhythm of the city followed the rhythm of this craft. In the archives of Babylon, there exist records of temple administrators calculating daily brick output. A team of 10 workers might produce 1,500 bricks in a day. That meant thousands of days, thousands of teams, for each major construction. The Temple of Esagila alone required an estimated 50 million bricks. It is difficult to imagine such a number, the sheer monotony of it. And yet, in that monotony, civilization was formed. For the workers, there was little sense of glory. Babylon's splendor was not for them. The city's avenues were paved with fired bricks. For royal processions, its temples were lined with glazed tiles, painted deep blue and gold. But in the workers' quarters, houses were built from sun-dried clay, crumbling with every rainy season, rebuilt again and again. It was a city divided not just by class, but by material. Those who lived in dust, and those who lived in stone. Still, there were small moments of pride. To see one's bricks used in the walls of the ziggurat, to know that one's labor would hold up the dwelling place of the gods, might have offered a quiet satisfaction. The Babylonian worldview was one of divine order, the gods above, the king beneath them, and humanity serving both. To make bricks was to take part in that cosmic duty, even if only as a tiny fragment of the whole. Archaeologists have found graffiti scratched into some bricks, small marks, initials, or crude drawings. They might have been idle scribbles or secret signatures of workers who wanted to leave some trace of their presence. Most are impossible to interpret, but in those faint scratches, one can sense the human urge to be remembered, to resist complete anonymity. As the city grew, so too did its appetite for labor. Entire villages were relocated to supply the construction of Babylon's walls and temples. The Euphrates was redirected to flood new clay pits. Administrative tablets list workers by name and ration. Iluitia, 2 measures of barley. Nabushuma, 3 measures. Behind every royal decree was an entire machinery of logistics: scribes, overseers, transporters, and brickmakers. To build the Hanging Gardens, if they truly existed, would have required not only architecture but irrigation, soil transport, and thousands of baked bricks sealed with bitumen to hold back the water. Even if the gardens were myth, the infrastructure was real, and it began with mud. You can almost picture it: rows of laborers bent under the sun, stamping bricks with the king's name, their hands caked in clay. A scribe sits under a canopy, tallying their output. The air smells of wet earth and smoke. In the distance, the tower rises, a stairway of baked clay, reaching toward the sky. Each worker knows that his contribution is small, almost invisible. Yet without it, the tower cannot stand. Centuries later, when Alexander the Great arrived at Babylon, the once great ziggurat of Etemenanke lay in ruins. He ordered it rebuilt. The ancient brick pits were reopened, the same process begun anew. But Alexander died before the work was finished, and the ziggurat crumbled once more into dust. The cycle of building and decay continued, as it always had. The empire that had been built brick by brick returned, in time, to the same clay from which it was made. And still, the river runs. The same mud settles each year on its banks. The same mixture that built Babylon builds villages even today. Bricks, molded, dried, stacked, used to house families who no longer remember the names of Nebuchadnezzar or Hammurabi. The technology has barely changed in 5,000 years. The rhythm continues. Perhaps that is the true legacy of Babylon. Not its conquest, not its gods, not even its fabled gardens, but the persistence of human hands shaping the earth, repeating the same motion across millennia. As you stand there, watching the workers move like shadows in the heat, you might wonder, what did they think of the city they built? Did they believe in its eternity? Or did they already sense that every wall would someday fall, every brick return to dust? And if every empire begins in the mud and ends in the mud, what then is the true measure of civilization? You wake again to the sound of the river. It is morning on the plain, and the mist has not yet lifted from the slow, winding water. The air smells faintly of silt and smoke. Near the banks, the brickmakers are already at work. The sun has not yet burned through the haze, but the heat is coming. It always comes. You can almost hear the rhythm, the dull slap of clay being packed into molds, the splash of water, the murmur of men. There is no rush here, only endurance. The day stretches long and quiet. Babylon was not built once it was rebuilt endlessly. Every flood, every war, every fire brought a new phase of construction. Each reconstruction required the same effort, the same materials, the same monotonous labor. And with every generation, the same hands repeated the same gestures, digging, mixing, pressing, drying. It is easy, from the distance of time, to imagine empires as great machines of ambition. Yet when you draw closer, they are composed of lives like these, slow, repetitive, almost invisible. The workers of Babylon were bound to the city's lifeblood, the Euphrates River. Every aspect of their existence revolved around its cycle. When the floods came in early spring, the work shifted. Pits filled with water. Clay had to be collected elsewhere. The river deposited fresh silt, rich and pliable, perfect for brickmaking, but it also swallowed fields and homes. So the workers waited, repairing kilns, sharpening tools, patching roofs. Then, as the waters receded, the rhythm began anew. It was a rhythm older than the city itself, older even than Babylon's name. The earliest records of Mesopotamian building date back to the city of Uruk, nearly 1,000 years before Nebuchadnezzar's time. There too the people used mud and straw. They built temples, walls, and houses of the same form, following nearly identical methods. Over centuries the techniques were refined, but the essence never changed. Civilization grew not from invention, but from consistency. That perhaps is what makes Babylonian history so strangely soothing. It unfolds slowly, predictably, as if time itself were made of clay, malleable, patient, and ultimately impermanent. In one of the old administrative tablets found near the ruins of the Esagila temple, there is a record of brick rations. It lists daily portions of barley, onions, and dates provided to each laborer. A single worker received around 2 liters of barley per day, enough for coarse bread or beer. Supervisors received more. The hierarchy was marked not only in wealth, but in diet. Meals were simple but vital. Bread, porridge, dried fish, and beer formed the staples. Beer, thick and unfiltered, was safer than water and served as hydration as much as nourishment. Workers drank it throughout the day, often mixed with herbs to mask its bitterness. At midday, when the sun reached its height, work slowed. Men sat in the shade of reed huts, hands caked with dried clay, faces streaked with dust. Conversation was sparse, small talk about the quality of the mud, or complaints about rations, or gossip about overseers. Some might hum old songs. Others might simply close their eyes and drift in the heat. Life was measured not in days or months, but in cycles. The time it took for a brick to dry, a wall to rise, a season to pass. And yet, within this monotony, the Babylonian system thrived. Every piece of the empire's infrastructure depended on such regularity: irrigation canals, storage silos, and temple foundations. Even the famed Ishtar Gate, with its brilliant blue glaze and depictions of lions and dragons, was built upon layers of ordinary sun-dried brick. The dazzling surface was only a veneer. Beneath it lay the same dull clay as the workers' homes. Contrast was deliberate. The city's rulers believed in visible order, that the divine could be expressed through perfection of form and material. The Ishtar Gate stood as both monument and message. The gods favored Babylon, and its king ruled with celestial approval. The walls, the streets, the palaces, all were constructed to embody harmony, even if that harmony was built upon human exhaustion. For the brickmakers, this was both pride and burden. Their labor was holy, but their lives were expendable. A temple worker's day might begin before sunrise, with offerings to Nabu or Marduk, the gods of wisdom and creation. Small clay figurines were sometimes buried beneath new buildings, serving as protective symbols. The workers may have believed these effigies kept them safe from collapse or curse. Or perhaps they simply followed orders, trusting the priests who oversaw the rituals. Religion in Babylon was inseparable from daily life. Even brickmaking had its divine patronage. The god Ea Enki was said to have taught humanity the secrets of shaping the earth. Each molded brick, then, was a gesture of participation in the act of creation. But beneath this spiritual order lay an unspoken truth. Most laborers did not choose their work. Some were debtors, forced into service to repay what they owed. Others were prisoners from conquered lands: Elamites, Assyrians, Phoenicians, brought to Babylon in chains. They lived in barracks outside the city walls, guarded by soldiers. They were not free to leave. Their families might live nearby, or be held elsewhere as collateral. Their survival depended entirely on obedience. Still, records show moments of leniency: extra rations during festivals, permission to rest during floods, or early release for those who completed quotas. The system was harsh, but not chaotic. Babylon's strength lay in its bureaucracy. Every brick, every worker, every loaf of bread was counted. Some scribes recorded the details with obsessive precision. In the 11th month, 13th day, 2,000 bricks molded by the laborers of the Canal District. Overseer Bel Edina reports cracks in the kiln. Repairs ordered. It reads like a mundane note, yet it preserves an entire day of human effort. A moment when someone, long forgotten, struggled to keep the fire hot enough to harden the clay. The scribes themselves were part of another hierarchy, literate men who never touched the mud, yet whose words defined the world. To write was to rule. The brickmaker's body built the city, but the scribe's stylus gave it shape in eternity. The tablet would survive long after both men were gone. Every level of Babylonian society depended on another. The farmer grew the barley that fed the worker. The worker built the granary that stored the barley. The scribe counted both. The priest blessed them. The king claimed the glory. And so, through layers of labor and control, the empire maintained its delicate balance. At night, after the day's work was done, the riverbank grew quiet. Fires flickered. The workers washed the clay from their skin in the cool water. Some might gather in small groups, sharing bread or songs. Others would lie awake, staring at the stars. The Babylonians were skilled astronomers. Even the lowest laborers knew the movement of constellations. They could recognize the appearance of Ishtar's star or the slow passage of the moon through its phases. The same stars that guided priests and kings shone equally upon the fields and clay pits. Perhaps, in those rare moments of stillness, a worker might look toward the ziggurat, its upper terraces faintly glowing in moonlight, and wonder about its purpose. The priests said it was a stairway for the gods, a bridge between heaven and earth. But from the ground, it must have seemed impossibly large, impossibly distant. To build a temple for the gods was to serve eternity. But eternity, like clay, was fragile. Even during Nebuchadnezzar's reign, cracks appeared in the empire's perfection. Droughts troubled the irrigation canals. Rival tribes raided the outer provinces. The cost of maintaining Babylon's grandeur grew immense. Taxes increased. Labor demands rose. More and more workers were conscripted to keep the city shining. For those in the mud, the strain must have felt endless. Still, the system endured, because it worked, because people believed, or had no choice but to believe, that their place in it mattered. The same belief has built every empire since, that one's effort, no matter how small, supports something greater. Yet something changed in the final years of Babylon's glory. New rulers emerged to the east, the Persians, with their efficient administration and vast armies. To the west, trade routes shifted. Babylon's wealth began to falter. But in the clay fields, little changed. The workers continued molding bricks, unaware that their empire's days were numbered. The same mud, the same straw, the same king's stamp. In the archives, a final set of tablets records diminishing rations, unfinished projects, and shortages of bitumen. The tone of the entries grows anxious, hurried. Somewhere between the lines, you can sense it, the quiet unraveling of an order too vast to perceive its own collapse. And still, the brickmakers worked. The ziggurat was repaired again and again. The walls were strengthened. The river was dredged. To them, the empire was eternal, or at least as eternal as the next sunrise. But history moves silently, like water wearing down a stone. One day, the king's seal would no longer matter. The clay tablets would be buried under dust. The river would shift its course. And the workers, whose lives were measured by the weight of mud, would vanish into the same earth they once shaped. You can almost imagine it now, the last batch of bricks drying in the sun, as word spreads through the camps. The Persians are coming. The city's gates will fall. The towers will crumble. The workers do not run. They finish their task, stacking bricks neatly in rows. because that is what they have always done. And as the sun sets on the last day of Babylon's independence, the mud glows red in the fading light, the same color as it did when the city was first born. What did the brickmakers think as the empire's end approached? Did they sense that history was turning around them, or did they only see another day's work to complete before the night? And if every great fall begins unnoticed, in silence and routine, then how many such moments are unfolding right now, beneath our own towers of glass and steel? Section 3. The Dust of Kings. Approx 800 words. See. The river runs slower now. The air feels heavier, as though the land itself knows that something has changed. You stand again upon the same plain, but the sound of the city has dimmed. The cries of traders, the rumble of carts, the steady rhythm of brickmakers at work, all of it has softened into a low murmur. The empire that once declared itself eternal is now pausing, like a breath drawn and never released. It is the late 6th century BCE. Babylon stands, but its strength trembles beneath the surface. The brick kilns still smoke, the temples still gleam under the desert sun, yet the flow of labor and wealth that once fed the city is slowing. The king, Nabonidus, last of Babylon's rulers, has turned his attention to the worship of the moon god Sin, neglecting Marduk, the city's own protector. The priests whisper their disapproval. The people grow restless. The workers, though, the brickmakers, the diggers, the carriers continue as they always have. Empires may argue about gods and kings, but clay does not wait. On the riverbank, the familiar rhythm persists. Water mixed with silt, straw scattered by hand, molds pressed and lifted. It is a ritual older than any king's reign. The process itself feels sacred, not because of its grandeur, but because of its unbroken repetition. Yet this season feels different. Rations are thinner, the overseers are stricter, the scribes write faster, sometimes scratching corrections into the wet clay of their tablets before it dries. The air smells not just of earth, but of tension, of something about to end. In the city, rumors flow like the river. A new empire is rising. The Persians, led by a king named Cyrus, who conquers not with destruction, but with order. His armies move quietly across the lands once ruled by Babylon, and those who face them fall quickly, sometimes without battle. They say he builds, not burns, that he honors the gods of every city he enters. To the brickmakers, the stories mean little. They have seen kings come and go, temples built and rebuilt. The work remains. But even so, whispers of change drift among the workers' huts. Some wonder what will happen when the Persians arrive. Others dismiss it. The clay must still be turned, the kilns still fed. A brickmaker named Bel-Edin, one of the many whose names appear on ration tablets, continues his task. He has worked for decades, his hands scarred and rough, his shoulders permanently bent. His sons work beside him. They will inherit his trade, his calluses, and perhaps his silence. He has built temples and storehouses, walls and bridges, but he owns nothing of what he creates. Still, he is proud of his craft. He knows the feel of good clay, the proper mixture, the moment when it is neither too wet nor too dry. Bel-Edin has seen the city's skyline rise and fall with each generation of rulers. He has heard the priests speak of Marduk's favor and the king's divine right. He has no illusions. The gods demand offerings, and the kings demand walls. Both must be fed with labor. And yet he believes that work itself holds meaning. To shape the earth, to leave behind something solid, even if it is only a brick stamped with another man's name, is to resist the void. As the sun sets one evening, Bel-Edin and his sons watch the ziggurat of Etemenanke glowing in the distance. Its shadow falls across the plain. Once, it had been the tallest structure in the known world, rising in layers toward the heavens. Now, parts of it crumble, its glazed bricks cracked, its stairways worn smooth. Repairs are always underway, but the temple seems to age faster than it can be restored. Bel-Edin's youngest son asks, "Father, do you think the gods will live here forever?" The man does not answer right away. He looks toward the horizon, where the river bends like a serpent through the fields. "The gods go where the people build for them," he finally says. "And when we stop building, they go silent." The boy nods, not understanding fully, but sensing that his father's words carry weight. A few weeks later, messengers arrive from the north. The Persians are coming, not in years but in days. Panic ripples through the markets. Nobles send their treasures into hiding. The priests gather offerings for Marduk, pleading for protection. But the brickmakers remain at their pits. Their orders are unchanged. Finish the batch, dry the bricks, fire what you can. When Cyrus's army reaches the outskirts of Babylon, there is no great battle. The gates open quietly. Some say the priests themselves unlock them, believing that Marduk has abandoned the Babylonian king and chosen Cyrus as his new servant. Others say the river was diverted, that the Persians marched along its dry bed into the heart of the city. Whatever the truth, the fall of Babylon happens not with thunder, but with silence. No walls collapse, no temples burn. The Persians enter the city peacefully. Cyrus orders that no buildings be destroyed, no citizens harmed. He even visits the temples and makes offerings to the gods. In a decree that would later be carved into the famous Cyrus cylinder, he claims to have restored Babylon's worship, freed its captives, and brought peace to its people. For the workers, life continues. The new overseers speak a different language, but the tasks are the same. The stamps on the bricks now bear new names: Cyrus, King of Kings, but the mud is unchanged. Bel-Edin still works the same clay pit, though the rations improve slightly. His sons note the new order, the calm efficiency of Persian rule. The scribes record in Aramaic as well as Akkadian now. The bureaucracy grows even more intricate. The empire expands, absorbing others. Babylon remains one of its jewels, a city of learning and law. But something has shifted beneath the surface. The great ziggurat, the pride of Babylon, is never fully restored. Its foundation cracks again and again, and eventually, the upper levels collapse. Repairs are attempted but abandoned. The Persians move their capital eastward, to Susa and Persepolis. Babylon becomes a provincial city, its brilliance fading. Still, the brickmakers remain stubborn, persistent, anonymous. They continue to dig the same clay, to shape the same bricks, to build smaller temples and homes. For them, history does not move in dramatic leaps, but in slow circles. Generations pass, the names of the kings change, but the work remains. When Alexander the Great conquers Babylon in 3331 BCE, he marvels at its ruins and dreams of restoring them. He orders the ziggurat rebuilt, as Nebuchadnezzar once had. The pits are reopened, the molds remade. Once again the river gives up its clay, and the air fills with the scent of wet earth and fire. But before the work is complete, Alexander dies. His empire fractures. The project is abandoned. The bricks, half-fired, are left to crumble in the sun. And so, the city decays. layer upon layer of dust and memory. In time, the desert swallows it. The Euphrates shifts course, leaving the old riverbanks dry. The once great ziggurat becomes a mound of rubble. Villagers carry away its bricks to build their homes. The inscriptions of Nebuchadnezzar, once stamped into millions of perfect squares, are broken and scattered. The royal seal becomes part of kitchen walls and animal pens. Bel-Edin's descendants, if they survived, would have lived among these ruins. Perhaps they continued to make bricks, not for kings but for farmers and traders. Perhaps they forgot the names of the gods entirely, but their hands still knew the rhythm. The motion of shaping clay does not fade easily from memory. Centuries later, when archaeologists began to dig at the site of Babylon, they found those same bricks. Each one was stamped, as if history itself had signed its name. Thousands bore the mark of Nebuchadnezzar. Others carried different seals: Nabonidus, Cyrus, Darius. A few, faint and irregular, bore only scratches, the marks of workers, like the ghost of a fingerprint. The archaeologists catalogued them carefully, stacking them in neat rows, much as the ancient builders once had. They photographed each inscription, translated each phrase, and in doing so, they resurrected the voices of a vanished world, not the voices of kings or priests, but the faint echo of labor. You can still see them today in museums and storerooms. The same bricks that once held up the walls of Babylon now sit quietly behind glass, labeled with numbers and dates. Their color has faded to pale brown, their edges are chipped. But if you look closely, you can still see the impressions of straw, the tiny air bubbles left by ancient hands. They are, in a sense, the most ordinary of artifacts, mere building materials, yet they are also the most enduring. Palaces have crumbled, gods have vanished, languages have died, but the bricks remain. They hold the memory of everything. It is tempting to look at them and think of the grandeur of Babylon, the shining walls, the hanging gardens, the processions of kings. But perhaps the real story is quieter, the patient endurance of those who built it all, knowing they would never see their own names remembered. The empire fell, but the craft endured. Across time, across cultures, the same humble act continued, mixing earth and water, shaping it with care, letting it dry beneath the sun. From Mesopotamia to modern towns along the Tigris, the rhythm survives. And so, when we speak of the fall of Babylon, perhaps it is not a single event at all, but a slow return. The city dissolving back into the clay. And so, when we speak of the fall of Babylon, perhaps it is not a single event at all, but a slow return, the city dissolving back into the clay from which it was born, the glory of kings replaced by the persistence of ordinary hands. The dust of Babylon drifts still, carried by the wind, settling into fields and riverbanks. Somewhere a farmer turns the soil, unaware that what he touches was once the foundation of a world. In the end, everything returns to earth. Gold fades, glory erodes, but the ghosts remain, quiet, steady, unbroken. You wonder as you stand in the ruins whether the brickmakers knew this all along, whether in their slow, deliberate work they understood something the kings never did, that permanence is not in monuments, but in motion, the endless shaping, breaking, and reshaping of the world. And if that is true, then perhaps Babylon never truly fell. Perhaps it only changed form, returning, as all things do, to the hands that made it. The year is somewhere around 500 BCE. The sun rises over the Persian plateau, and the air carries the dry scent of stone and dust. From the terraces of Persepolis, The mountains stand like ancient sentinels. Their slopes are grey, carved by wind and time. Between them, the royal complex of the Achaemenid kings gleams faintly in the morning light. Columns upon columns, reliefs of soldiers and courtiers, lions and bulls, the eternal symbols of empire. You stand among them, though your hands do not hold a sword or a scepter. Instead, you hold a reed stylus. You are a scribe. The hum of the morning in Persepolis is unlike any other city. There are no cries of merchants here, no laughter of street vendors. Persepolis is not a marketplace. It is an idea made of stone, the ceremonial heart of an empire that stretches from the Aegean Sea to the Indus Valley. Its walls are carved with languages from across the known world: Old Persian, Elamite, Akkadian. In its storerooms and offices, thousands of clay tablets record the machinery of this vast dominion. This is not the poetry of kings. This is administration. It is quiet work, and in its quietness lies its power. You rise before dawn. The scribal rooms are cool and dim. On long wooden tables lie rows of damp clay tablets, waiting to be inscribed. The clay has been carefully prepared, mixed, kneaded, smoothed. A single tablet might contain an order for grain, or a record of wages, or the details of a royal feast. Each must be perfect. Each must last. You dip your stylus, a cut reed sharpened at one end, and begin pressing symbols into the soft clay. Each mark must be precise, each wedge angled just so. The work is not creative, not expressive, it is technical, repetitive, and utterly necessary. You write in Elamite today, the administrative language of the Persian court. It is an old tongue, already fading from daily use, but the empire runs on it. The Persians themselves, with their own royal script, use Old Persian mainly for monuments, declarations, edicts, praises. But for the business of empire, for the storage of grain, the movement of troops, the payment of rations, Elamite remains the tool of record. The first line of your tablet reads, Werabret 22 measures of barley, distributed to the workers of the road at Matanan, by order of the overseer Pasha, in the month of Thuravahara. It is to an outsider a dull line. To you it is the rhythm of empire. Each wedge you press into the clay is a fragment of control, a record that ensures the king's will is carried out across lands too vast for his eyes to see. The scribes of Persepolis are not poets, but they are builders of a different kind. Their medium is not brick, but memory. The empire exists in their records, as much as in its walls or armies. Outside, the courtyards fill with movement. Messengers arrive from distant provinces, Bactria, Lydia, Egypt. They bring clay tablets wrapped in linen, sealed with stamps bearing the marks of local governors. The scribes receive them carefully, logging each one in the register. The tablets are sorted by region, by date, by subject. Some are copied, some are translated. All are stored in clay jars, marked with their contents. It is said that over 30,000 tablets once filled the archives of Persepolis, and these were only a fraction of what existed. The scribes work in silence. They are trained to be invisible, efficient, precise. The hierarchy among them is strict. Senior scribes oversee juniors, who in turn supervise apprentices. Errors are corrected swiftly. Sloppiness is punished. Yet there is pride here too. To be a scribe is to belong to a class of rare skill, a bridge between languages and worlds. Many of the scribes are not Persians by birth. Some come from Elam, others from Babylon, Susa, or Media. They speak several languages, read more, and understand the subtle politics of translation. The empire relies on such men, quiet intermediaries who can turn orders into law, numbers into rations, speech into permanence. Your workroom is windowless. The air smells faintly of damp clay and oil lamps. Every sound, the soft scrape of styluses, the occasional clearing of a throat, seems amplified in the stillness. You know the rhythm by heart. Press, turn, press again, wipe the stylus, begin anew. In a corner, a tablet dries on a small shelf. Its inscription records the distribution of wine for a royal festival. Another, already baked and sealed, bears the ration list for the construction workers at Persepolis itself. Some of those men receive their pay in barley, others in goats or wine. The empire's wealth flows not as coin, but as measured goods. And it is the scribes who measure. Each entry, each wedge, is an act of faith. Faith in the system, in the idea that order can be maintained across thousands of miles through clay and ink. You glance up occasionally at the carved reliefs outside the hall. They depict rows of courtiers bringing tribute to the king, bowls of gold, animals, fabrics, gifts from every province. But you know what those carvings do not show: the records behind them, the endless paperwork, the quiet men who account for every item. Without that bureaucracy, the empire would crumble within months. It is strange to think that the might of Persia, with its armies and architecture, depends so completely on the patience of men like you. At midday, the overseer walks through the room. His robes are fine, his eyes sharp. He inspects the tablets, nods, and occasionally makes notes on a wax board. The wax is easier to reuse. It is for temporary orders, drafts, lists that will not outlast the week. Clay, though, clay is for the permanent. A single tablet once fired can last thousands of years, and yet, at the moment you write it, it feels fragile. It could crumble with one careless touch. When you finish an inscription, you hand it to an apprentice. He smooths the surface around the edges and carries it to the drying racks. There, it will rest until it hardens enough to be handled safely. Later, some will be fired in kilns. Others will remain raw, temporary records meant to be read and discarded once their information has been used. It is an entire ecosystem of writing, built upon mud and routine. The sun climbs higher, flooding the courtyards with light. Outside, the sound of builders echoes faintly, hammers striking stone, oxen dragging beams. The palace complex is still growing. Darius the Great, who ordered its construction, envisioned Persepolis as a monument to unity, a place where the many peoples of his empire could be represented in harmony. The reliefs on the Apadana stairway show them all: Medes, Egyptians, Indians, Ionians, each carved with care, each carrying offerings. But in the record rooms, unity takes another form. Here, the empire is reduced to numbers and symbols, the abstract reflection of the physical world. And yet, in these small, monotonous acts, something profound takes place. Every measure of grain, every ration of wine, every list of workers represents not just administration, but trust. The belief that writing can make reality stable. The Persians inherited this belief from the Babylonians and Sumerians before them, just as future civilizations would inherit it from the Persians. The scribes of Persepolis are part of that long, unbroken chain, the custodians of order in a world too large to control by force alone. In the evenings, after the lamps are extinguished, the tablets cool in silence. The night wind carries the scent of the desert. Stars appear above the terraces. The halls of Persepolis gleam faintly in their light, the reliefs casting long, sharp shadows. Somewhere a scribe lies awake in his quarters, thinking not of glory or conquest, but of words, of the next day's lists, of the stylus he must repair, of the clay that must be prepared just right. His mind drifts over the shapes of symbols, wedges and lines that have become as familiar to him as his own breathing. He knows that the work is endless. For every order carried out, 10 more must be written. For every temple completed, new rations must be issued. The empire feeds on itself, consuming record after record, transaction after transaction. And yet, he takes comfort in that endlessness. In the steady, unchanging flow of ink and clay, there is peace. The empire may rise or fall, that is for kings to worry about. The scribe's duty is to record, to preserve, to translate chaos into form. Outside, the mountains hold their silence. Inside, the words multiply. No one will remember the names of these scribes, though their work will outlast dynasties. When Persepolis burns centuries later, some of their tablets will be buried under the rubble, protected by accident. Thousands of years after that, when archaeologists uncover them, they will still be legible, the marks crisp, the language decipherable. They will reveal not battles or conquests, but something quieter and more enduring, a record of daily life, of rations, of duties fulfilled, the hum of empire captured in clay. And so you write, line after line, pressing symbols into the earth, knowing that the words you inscribe are both temporary and eternal. For now, the empire stands, the records grow, the clay cools. But deep in the silence of the mountains, time begins its slow erosion. The ink will fade, the tablets will crack. And yet, their language, the language of order, will echo long after Persepolis itself has turned to dust. You wonder as the lamps flicker low, if writing gives shape to power, what happens when the writing stops? The days at Persepolis pass in quiet symmetry. The sun rises and sets over the terraces, and each day brings with it another stack of tablets, another set of figures, another slow accumulation of words. In this stillness, an empire breathes, not through the clash of armies, but through the soft press of styluses into clay. The scribes have no monuments of their own. Their legacy is written not in stone, but in the fragile medium of mud. And yet, their work sustains every column, every banquet, every soldier in the great king's service. To walk through the archives of Persepolis is to step into the hidden heart of the empire. The chambers are lined with shelves made of cedar and reed. Clay tablets sit in careful rows, their surfaces gleaming faintly in the dim light of oil lamps. Each is stamped with the seal of an official, each catalogued with precision. Some shelves hold temporary records, tablets that will be recycled once read, while others contain those destined for permanence. The air is dry, filled with the scent of dust, oil, and clay. The silence is almost sacred. You are a junior scribe now, a few years into your service. Your hand has grown steadier, your eye more discerning. You can read the subtle distinctions between Elamite, Akkadian, and Old Persian with ease. You have learned that translation is not merely language, but power, the act of choosing which words survive and which do not. Each language serves its purpose. Old Persian is for royal proclamations, the grand formal inscriptions carved into stone, meant to endure as declarations of divine authority. Elamite, the bureaucratic tongue, handles the practical business of empire. Akkadian, older and broader, is used for correspondence with Babylon and Assyria, where the scribal tradition is even older than your own. The scribes of Persepolis must balance all three. They are the interpreters of an empire that spans countless peoples, each with its own tongue, its own customs. Without them, the machinery of administration would grind to a halt. Each morning begins with review. The senior scribe, known simply as the Tupsaru Rabu, reads aloud from the previous day's records. His voice is slow and deliberate, the tone of ritual. He checks numbers, cross-references names, verifies seals. Errors are rare but not unknown. A single misplaced wedge can alter the meaning of an entire order. You remember your first mistake vividly. A missing symbol turned 30 measures of barley into 3. The workers went hungry for a week before the discrepancy was noticed. You were reprimanded, not for malice, but for carelessness, a far greater sin in the world of the scribes. The senior scribe had said only one sentence to you. The empire falls one wedge at a time. You have not forgotten it. Every scribe carries a stylus made from reed or bronze, shaped to fit the hand precisely. The best are passed down through generations, their tips worn smooth by years of use. Each stylus carries memory, the pressure of previous hands, the rhythm of a lineage. To hold one is to feel the pulse of continuity, the same way a mason feels the weight of his hammer, or a soldier the balance of his spear. The life of a scribe is orderly, but not easy. Eyes strain under lamplight, fingers cramp clay, dust fills the lungs, mistakes are costly. Yet, there is dignity in this work. The great king himself, Darius, understood the power of writing. What is written endures, he once declared. What is spoken vanishes. He commissioned inscriptions across the empire, on cliffs, palaces, and tombs, each carved in 3 scripts to be read by all his subjects. The Behistun inscription, high on a mountainside, tells of his victories and his divine right to rule. You have never seen it, but you have copied its text many times from exemplars kept in the archives. The words are formal, rigid, unchanging. They are meant not to inform, but to preserve an image, the image of a ruler who governs through truth and law. Within the archives, that same principle applies on a smaller scale. The scribes do not invent truth, they record it. Yet in recording it, they define it. A shipment of grain delayed by floods becomes grain withheld for royal reserve. A missing worker becomes absent for the king's service. The scribes smooth over discrepancies, turn chaos into order. It is not deceit, merely the logic of administration. The empire must appear perfect, even when it is not. This is how all great systems endure, not by erasing mistakes, but by writing them in such a way that they no longer seem like failures. At midday, the halls grow warm, the lamps are extinguished, and the scribes eat in the shade outside. Bread, dates, lentils, and watered wine. Conversation is minimal, but sometimes a junior will ask questions of the elders, about languages, about kings, about history. One day, you ask, "Master, what happens to the tablets when the words are no longer needed?" The elder looks at you, eyes clouded but sharp. "They return to the earth," he says simply, "as all things do. The clay that carries law will someday be trampled underfoot. That is the nature of permanence." You think about that often. Each time you inscribe a tablet, you wonder how long it will last. A year, a decade, forever. You press the stylus carefully, as if each mark might outlive the empire itself. The empire is vast, but it runs on trust. Trust in symbols, in seals, in the ability of a distant official to understand a record written hundreds of miles away. A single mistake can unravel entire systems of supply. A misplaced shipment can starve a regiment or delay construction on a royal palace. That is why every number, every mark matters. Sometimes, when the senior scribes are absent, you wander through the upper terraces. The air there smells of cedar and lime. From the edge, you can see the entire complex. The hall of 100 columns, the Apadana, the long stairways where carved envoys carry their tributes in endless procession. Below, the workers toil, masons, carpenters, painters, cooks, guards. Each group is recorded somewhere in the archives. Their names, or at least the symbols that stand for their names, pass through your hands daily. You are one of the few who see the entire web, the invisible network that holds the empire together. You know which provinces send timber, which provide horses, which supply gold. You know the routes of caravans, the quantities of grain consumed by the royal household, the exact number of workers assigned to polish the palace floors. To most, the empire is a vast and abstract thing. To you, it is measurable, quantifiable, a world built from numbers and clay. That knowledge carries a quiet power. It is not unusual for scribes to rise in status. A few have become administrators, governors, even royal secretaries. But most prefer the stability of anonymity. Kings come and go, scribes endure. Their value lies in their consistency, their ability to translate chaos into legible order. Still, beneath that calm exterior, doubt sometimes stirs. One evening, after the workday ends, you linger near the archives as the light fades. The air cools, and the last tablets of the day are stacked neatly on the shelves. The chamber feels timeless, almost outside of history. Yet, you notice cracks in the walls, small, creeping fissures caused by years of shifting stone. Dust falls from the ceiling in tiny, silent threads. You brush it away and think of the words sealed within these tablets. Will they endure? Will anyone, centuries from now, understand this language? Or will the clay crumble before it can be read again? You think of the earlier empires, the Babylonians, the Assyrians, the Elamites, all once mighty, now reduced to ruins. Their records, too, were written in clay. Their words still exist, buried beneath layers of earth, though the hands that wrote them are long gone. Perhaps that is the true work of the scribe, to leave behind fragments that may one day be found, to speak across centuries in a language half forgotten. As the stars emerge above the palace, you look toward the horizon. Somewhere beyond those mountains lies Babylon, old, weary, fallen. Its scribes once believed their tablets would last forever. Perhaps they did, in their own way. You cannot know. But you can imagine their hands, pressing styluses into clay, just as you do now, shaping the same symbols, guided by the same quiet purpose. Across centuries, the scribes of different empires are joined by the same rhythm, the sound of wedges in mud, the heartbeat of civilization. The next morning, new messages arrive. Reports from Sardis, complaints from Egypt, inventories from Susa. You take your place at the table, stylus in hand, and begin again. You record without judgment, you translate without question, you preserve without expectation. For a moment, you wonder whether the empire itself exists only because you record it. Without the tablets, the grain would not be counted, the soldiers would not be paid, the festivals would not be organized. Without your words, the empire would dissolve into memory. You press another wedge into the clay, steady and sure. The mark dries almost instantly in the dry air. You think of the old man's words, that even clay returns to earth. But perhaps, before it does, it will carry something further than he imagined. And as the last rays of sunlight fall across the terraces of Persepolis, the empire hums with quiet purpose. The halls glow gold, the wind rustles through the columns, and in the stillness of the archives, the language of power endures, silent, steady, and eternal. Yet, a question lingers, soft as dust on clay. If the scribes hold the empire together with their words, what happens when the words themselves are forgotten? It begins, as endings often do, in silence. The empire has grown heavy with its own weight. Darius the Great is long gone, his monument still glittering in the high light of Persepolis. But the pulse that once moved through the clay records has slowed. His sons and grandsons rule from the same terraces, issuing decrees written in the same careful hands. Yet something in the rhythm of the scribe's work has changed. The styluses still press into clay, but there is a subtle uncertainty in the lines, a faint hesitation, a pause before each mark. You are older now. Your hands bear the dry lines of years spent pressing reeds into wet earth. You have trained apprentices, signed seals, copied decrees. You have seen floods, shortages, celebrations, and funerals all recorded in the same quiet script. You have written more words than you could ever count, and yet, you feel the empire beginning to drift beyond the reach of words. There are rumors, of course, distant wars in the West, a restless young king named Alexander from a small Greek land, whispers of his armies crossing into Asia Minor, of battles won against Persian satraps. These are stories brought by merchants and travelers, easily dismissed, easily forgotten. The great king still sits upon his throne. The roads are still patrolled. The archives still function. But you feel something different in the air. The tablets continue to multiply. Even as the borders waver, the administration remains tireless. Orders for grain, repairs for roads, rations for troops, each recorded with precision, as if the simple act of documentation might hold the empire together. The scribes still speak in measured tones, their fingers moving with practiced ease, but when they pause, they listen to the silence beyond the palace walls. The world is shifting, and the clay no longer feels as permanent as it once did. You begin to notice more foreign words creeping into the archives, names of generals, places, and cities that no one here has ever seen. They come written in Akkadian, sometimes in Greek, scrawled by messengers who cannot shape proper cuneiform. The empire's communication, once so ordered, has become tangled. Translators argue, records contradict, orders overlap. One evening, a messenger arrives breathless from Susa. He carries a letter sealed with the royal emblem, the image of the great king beneath the winged disc. When it is opened, you are among those chosen to record its contents. The words are urgent. There are movements of troops, changes in command, demands for supplies. The tone is still authoritative, but there is something beneath it: fear. You copy the order onto clay, pressing each wedge carefully, as though accuracy might somehow alter the course of events. But deep inside, you know it will not. Outside, the courtyards are quiet. The festivals grow smaller, the processions less grand. The foreign envoys carved into the palace stairways, those eternal lines of tribute bearers, have long since vanished from life. Now the stairways themselves begin to crack beneath the desert sun. The paint that once colored the reliefs has faded to dust. And yet, in the archives, the scribes continue. For years, this persistence gives the illusion of stability. Even as the armies of Alexander advance through the empire, taking Sardis, then Babylon, then Susa, the tablets of Persepolis remain unbroken. The scribes write as though the empire were eternal. Until, one night, it ends. It is spring, the season of renewal, when the end arrives in fire. You are awakened by the sound of shouting, the dull thud of boots on stone. The air is thick with the smell of smoke. From your chamber near the lower terrace, you see the flames rising, orange against the black sky, the reflection flickering on the polished columns. For a moment, you do not believe it. Persepolis has never burned. But the fire grows, swallowing the wooden roofs, climbing the stairways, leaping from hall to hall. You hear the crack of beams collapsing, the roar of stone splitting in the heat. The archives. You run toward them through the haze. The corridors are filled with smoke and panicked servants. Guards rush past, their faces ashen. Somewhere in the chaos, a jar of oil shatters, feeding the fire. The air turns sharp and choking. When you reach the record room, the door is already glowing from the heat. Inside, you can see the shelves burning, cedar and reed transformed into torches. The clay tablets, those thousands of words pressed by steady hands over decades, glow faintly in the firelight. Some crack, others blacken. A few harden, turning from soft mud to stone. You grab one, still warm, almost too hot to touch, and press it to your chest. It bears your handwriting, a record of grain sent to workers in Elam. It is meaningless now. The workers, the overseers, the roads themselves, all will be gone soon. But still, you cannot let it go. Around you, the fire consumes everything. Shelves collapse, spilling tablets that shatter on the floor. The sound is unlike anything you've heard, a chorus of cracking, breaking, exploding clay. Each fragment carries a word, a number, a name. And for the first time, you understand what it means for language to die. By morning, Persepolis is ash and ruin. The columns stand like ghosts against the rising sun. The air still smells of smoke and stone. In the distance, you see men, foreigners, dressed in armor unlike any you've known. They move through the ruins with awe, perhaps regret, perhaps pride. Their leader, the one called Alexander, stands at the terrace's edge, silent. He looks not at the gold or the carvings, but at the burned emptiness of the halls. You do not know if he regrets what he has done. You do not know if he even understands what has been lost. But you do. You walk through the remains of the archives, stepping over charred wood and brittle clay. Among the ashes, you find some tablets that survived. They are blackened, but the writing endures. The heat has baked them into permanence. You recognize some of your own marks, your own handwriting, preserved by the same fire that destroyed everything else. It is strange. The destruction that was meant to erase has instead preserved. In that moment, standing in the ruins, you realize that the empire was never truly made of gold, or armies, or palaces. It was made of words, of the small, careful marks that recorded the lives of people you would never meet. And though the empire has fallen, the words endure. Years later, though you will not live to see it, those same tablets will be buried beneath layers of dust and stone. They will sleep for more than 2,000 years, waiting in silence. When they are finally unearthed, archaeologists will hold them gently in their hands, brushing away the soil, reading the same wedges you once pressed into clay. They will find records of rations and wages, of grain and wine, of laborers and officials. They will marvel not at kings or conquests, but at the quiet machinery of daily life, the hum of empire written in the hand of forgotten scribes. They will find you there, in every line. And perhaps, as they study your words, they will understand what even Alexander could not, that power is fleeting, but administration is eternal. The scribes of Persepolis built no monuments, yet their legacy endures longer than any throne. Even now, across the centuries, their silence speaks. You imagine them, yourselves, sitting in the dim light of oil lamps, pressing styluses into clay, recording the slow rhythm of civilization. You imagine the sound of it, the soft, steady tap of reeds, the whisper of clay being shaped. The same sound that once echoed in Babylon, in Ur, in Susa, the sound that began history itself. The fire has passed, the empire has fallen, but the marks remain. They are the memory of order, the trace of a world that once believed it could be measured, weighed, and recorded. In the ruins, a single baked tablet rests at your feet. You pick it up carefully, brushing away the ash. Its edges are cracked, but the symbols are still clear, precise, sharp, deliberate. You trace them with your fingers. They are your marks. You smile faintly. And as the wind begins to rise, carrying the dust of Persepolis into the desert, you whisper a quiet truth that no conqueror will ever understand. And as the wind begins to rise, carrying the dust of Persepolis into the desert, you whisper a quiet truth that no conqueror will ever understand. The empire was never ours to hold. It was ours to write. The fire has taken the walls, but the words will remain. And someday, when all memory of kings and battles has faded, someone will read them again. And in that reading, the empire will live once more, if only for a moment. You look toward the horizon, where the mountains glow gold in the new light. The air is still, the clay cools, the silence deepens. History, like the tablets of Persepolis, endures by accident through what survives the fire. And in that accident, the scribes of Persepolis achieve what even their kings could not: immortality. The desert, when seen from above, looks eternal, a shifting sea of gold and pale white stretching toward the horizon. The wind moves across it in long sighs, reshaping dunes that will never remember their own forms. Yet somewhere within this unyielding landscape, there was once a dream of water flowing through the heart of sand. It was the dream of Pharaoh Necho II. You stand now on the banks of the Nile, the sun already fierce in the early morning. The year is around 600 BCE, and the pharaoh's banners flutter on the western horizon. The river gleams like a thread of blue glass cutting through the tan expanse of the land. To your left, beyond the green reeds and papyrus, the desert begins. The space between the Nile and the Red Sea, 100 miles of emptiness. That is where the pharaoh wants his canal. You are not a noble, not a priest, not even a soldier. You are a worker, one of the tens of thousands summoned by decree to dig what the pharaoh calls the path of the waters. The overseers say it will join the Nile to the Red Sea, letting ships pass from Egypt into distant lands without crossing open desert. The Greeks will later call it the first attempt at the Suez Canal. But for now, it is only a rumor turned into labor. At dawn, the work begins. The air is thick with dust and sweat. The canal route has been marked by lines of stones stretching toward the horizon. The land is flat at first, but soon the sand hardens into baked earth, a terrain that must be broken apart by picks and carried away in baskets. The sound is endless. Metal striking earth, the groan of wooden levers, the murmur of men counting the rhythm of their work. The pharaoh's engineers stand apart, shaded under linen canopies. They hold rods and strings, measuring distances, marking levels. Some are Egyptians, others from faraway lands, Phoenicians, Babylonians, even a few Greeks. They speak in different tongues but share a single language of geometry and ambition. Every few hundred paces, there are camps, rows of huts made from mud and reeds, where the workers sleep. The food is simple: bread, dried fish, beer. The water is rationed carefully, carried from the Nile in clay jars by carts drawn by oxen. You drink it warm and sandy, but it keeps you alive. You've heard the stories of workers who collapse under the sun, buried where they fall, of overseers who strike with whips made of hippopotamus hide, of fever that spreads through the camps like fire. But there is also a sense of pride, to be part of something vast, something that might outlast your own life. The pharaoh's heralds speak often of glory. Necho the Great, they proclaim, builder of the path between seas, who will make Egypt the center of the world. And for a moment, you almost believe it. The years have passed since the tools were laid down, since the last worker walked away from the sun-baked trench that was meant to join two worlds. The wind has done its quiet work well. The once straight walls of the canal are now soft ridges of sand. Reeds grow in the shallows where water once seeped, and small desert foxes cross where boats were meant to sail. And yet, The dream has not entirely vanished. Pharaoh Necho II still rules from Memphis, though his eyes have grown dim from the strain of leadership. His court is filled with noise, advisors, priests, soldiers, traders, all whispering of threats from the east, of Babylon's power growing like a shadow across the horizon. Egypt, once the unquestioned heart of civilization, feels the press of change. You are still alive, though older now, working as a laborer near the delta. The pharaoh's Grand Canal may have failed, but the work of Egypt never stops. You help repair irrigation channels for the fields, guiding the Nile's waters into farms that will feed the kingdom. The rhythm is the same: dig, carry, shape the earth, endure the sun. The difference is that here, the water always comes. Sometimes, at night, you think of the canal. You remember the strange mixture of exhaustion and pride, the sense that you were part of something vast, something the gods themselves might envy. Now, it feels like a forgotten story, a half-remembered dream. But the pharaoh has not entirely forgotten. In the palace, Necho II walks alone among his maps. They are drawn on linen and papyrus, networks of rivers, deserts, and coastlines inked in careful black and red. He runs his fingers over the lines that mark the canal route. He thinks of the men who died, of the priest's warnings, and of the vision that still burns quietly within him, a waterway linking Egypt to the seas beyond. His advisors urge him to abandon such fantasies. The gods did not will it, they say. The desert resists because the canal was never meant to be. But Necho, even in failure, remains a man of vision. He believes that Egypt must not only survive but lead, that its greatness depends on connecting the Nile to the world. He shifts his attention to the sea. The Red Sea, they say, is treacherous, filled with reefs and strong currents, but it also leads to distant lands rich in incense, gold, and spices. The pharaoh orders the construction of a fleet there, at a place called Wadi Tumilat. He brings in shipwrights from Phoenicia, the greatest seafarers of their age. Under his rule, the first great Egyptian warships built for ocean travel take shape. Their hulls are curved and sturdy, their sails painted with the royal falcon. Word spreads of his next ambition, to explore the boundaries of the known world. He commissions a voyage, a fleet of Phoenician sailors sent southward from the Red Sea, tasked with sailing around the entire continent of Africa and returning through the Mediterranean. The journey will take years, and many doubt it can be done. But Necho believes. He tells his priests that the gods have placed no limits on the Nile's children. For the workers of Egypt, this is distant news, something spoken about in markets and temples. You hear of it through merchants who pass along the canals, carrying barley and flax. The pharaoh sends ships beyond the ends of the earth, they say. He wants to see where the sea ends. It feels strange to think that the same man who once ordered you to dig across the desert is now commanding ships across an ocean. The dream has changed its form, but not its heart. Meanwhile, the canal sits forgotten in the sands, but nature, in its quiet persistence, begins to shape it anew. Rainwater, rare but relentless when it comes, fills certain sections during the season of storms. The trenches become temporary lakes, visited by herons and ibises. The salt gathers along the edges in pale crusts, glittering faintly under the sun. You visit the site once, years later. The journey takes days. You find that the desert has reclaimed nearly everything. Only the faintest outlines remain. Shallow ridges, half-buried stone markers, a few eroded hieroglyphs praising Necho as he who joined the two waters. You trace the carvings with your fingers, and for a moment, you hear the echo of picks and shovels, the voices of men long gone. It is quiet here now, and strangely peaceful. You think of how the pharaoh wanted to command the elements, to make water flow where none had before. Perhaps that is what every ruler dreams, to bend nature to human will, to carve eternity into the landscape. But eternity, you realize, does not bend easily. It erases instead, returning everything to dust. In the capital, time moves forward. Necho II grows older. His reign, once filled with ambition, begins to falter under the weight of politics and prophecy. The Babylonians defeat his armies in battle. Egypt's power wanes. Yet the pharaoh's name endures, whispered by those who worked under his command, remembered by those who saw him attempt what no one had before. There is a strange comfort in that, the idea that failure too can be remembered. But memory is fragile. Generations pass. Necho's successors rise and fall. The canal becomes legend, a line in temple records. Then, centuries later, a new power arrives, the Persians. When King Darius I takes Egypt, his scribes study the old scrolls and discover the story of the unfinished waterway. Darius, like Necho, is a man who dreams in grand designs. He orders the canal reopened. Once again, the desert fills with the sound of tools, new workers, new overseers, new languages. The Persians mark the canal route with stone stelae inscribed in multiple scripts: Old Persian, Elamite, Babylonian, Egyptian. One still survives today, found near modern Suez, proclaiming, "I am Darius, the King of Kings. I commanded to dig this canal from the river that is called Nile to the sea, that begins from Persia. Thus was done as I commanded." It is strange to think that Darius's men, hundreds of years after Necho, walk the same ground you once did, the same desert, the same wind, the same dream. They dig deeper, use new tools, line the channel with stone. For a time, they succeed. Water flows again. The Persians celebrate. Ships bearing goods from Arabia and India pass through the canal, entering the Nile. Egypt becomes once again the link between two worlds. And though Necho's name has faded, his dream, buried but not dead, flows once more beneath the desert sun. You do not live to see this, of course. You are long gone by then, buried somewhere near the river that sustained you. But the canal remains your legacy, as much as it was the pharaoh's. Without the hands of thousands like yours, the vision could never have existed at all. And yet, even this new canal is not eternal. The sands reclaim it again after the Persian Empire falls. The Romans come, and later the Arabs, and each in their turn rediscovers and redigs the channel. Over and over the dream repeats, to make water cross the desert, to join the seas. It is as though the land itself holds memory, not of kings or wars, but of effort, of human persistence. As centuries pass, the canal's story becomes part of the geography of Egypt's myth. Travelers speak of the ancient waterway that once ran between seas. Scholars debate whether it ever truly worked, whether Necho's vision was madness or foresight. They study fragments of inscriptions, half-buried ruins, and the faint lines visible from above. And always, the desert whispers, covering and uncovering the evidence like a slow tide. Perhaps the most haunting thought is this: the dream never really ended. Every age finds a way to remember it, to try again. When the modern Suez Canal is finally completed in the 19th century, more than 2,000 years after Necho's attempt, engineers find traces of the old channel, following nearly the same path. It is as if the pharaoh's ghost still guided their hands. When they dig through the earth and find remnants of the ancient trench, layers of clay shaped by forgotten workers, they note it briefly in their records. The world calls it progress, but beneath that word lies something older, quieter, more human. A memory of men who dug under the sun until their hands bled, chasing a dream they would never live to see fulfilled. You might wonder then, what is it that truly survives? The canal itself, or the idea that water can always find its way home? When the first trench begins to take shape, the scale becomes clear. The channel must be deep enough for ships, wide enough for two to pass. It will stretch across the desert for nearly 100 kilometers, cutting through rock, sand, and salt plain. The engineers say that the Red Sea and the Nile do not rest at the same height, that water may flood the land or vanish into the desert if the balance is wrong. To you, this means little. You are told where to dig, and you dig. Each day the sun climbs higher. The heat presses down like a living thing. The air vibrates. Tools become too hot to touch. Workers wrap linen around their heads and hands, leaving only their eyes uncovered. You learn to move slowly, to breathe through cloth, to let your body adjust to the rhythm of labor and heat. Sometimes you think of the Nile, of its cool banks and the shade of sycamore trees. But the Nile feels far. Sometimes you think of the Nile, of its cool banks and the shade of sycamore trees. But the Nile feels far away now, a world apart. Here, there is only dust and the sound of human effort. In the evenings, when the sun sinks and the air cools, you watch the desert change color. The sand turns rose, then violet, then gray. Fires flicker in the camp. The workers sit together, sharing what little they have. A story, a song, a piece of bread. There are Nubians, Syrians, Carians, Egyptians, men from all corners of the Pharaoh's dominion. None of them speak the same tongue completely, but the rhythm of survival is universal. Occasionally, an overseer will walk among the camps. His torchlight casts long shadows. He inspects the men, counts them, makes notes on a wooden board. You hear whispers that the Pharaoh himself has sent messengers to see the progress. Necho II is known to be a restless ruler, a man of vision and temper. He dreams not only of canals, but of fleets. He has ships built in the Nile Delta, great vessels meant to sail the seas beyond Egypt. He sends expeditions south around Africa, east toward Babylon, west toward Greece. Some return with treasures and stories, others never return at all. To the priests, this ambition is divine. To the workers, it is simply another decree. Still, you cannot help but feel a kind of wonder when you think about it. A canal across the desert, water flowing where there has only been sand since the beginning of time. It feels like an act of defiance against the gods themselves. The work continues for months, then years. The canal grows deeper, its sides lined with clay and stone to hold back the shifting earth. You begin to see water appear in the lower sections, seeping from the Nile-fed channels, shimmering faintly in the sun. The first sight of it sends a murmur through the workers. Men stop to stare, their faces dusty and hollow-eyed, as if looking upon a miracle. But the miracle is fragile. The water evaporates quickly, leaving behind cracked salt and mud. The engineers argue among themselves. The Pharaoh demands results. More workers are brought in. Some say that hundreds die each month, their names recorded by priests and quickly forgotten. The desert takes them quietly. You notice something else. The sand seems to reclaim what you build. Each morning, after a night's wind, the edges of the trench are half filled again. The desert does not care for Pharaoh's geometry. It erases with the same patience that you dig. Still, the orders do not change. You continue. The canal grows, then falters, then grows again. Some sections hold water, Others remain dry. You see ships brought on carts, small riverboats dragged across the dunes to test the new channels. They float for a few moments, then sink into the mud. The overseers do not speak of failure, they speak of adjustments. The priests hold ceremonies at the edges of the canal, offering incense and prayer to Hapi, the god of the Nile, and to the Red Sea's mysterious deities. They pour milk into the sand, chant hymns, and promise the pharaoh that the waters will soon meet. But they never do. Years pass. You grow older, your body lean and scarred from the work. You can no longer lift as much as you once did, but you know the patterns, how the ground feels under your feet, how the sun moves across the sky. You can tell the time of day by the color of the light alone. One evening, after the workers have eaten, a rumor spreads through the camp. The pharaoh has ordered the canal stopped. Too many men have died, too much gold has been spent, and the gods have shown no favor. Some say that Necho dreamed of a flood that drowned his ships, others that an oracle warned him the canal would bring ruin to Egypt. The next day, the overseers confirm it. The work is to cease. You stare at the trench, miles of open earth, walls crumbling, pools of stagnant water reflecting the dying light. For years, this has been your world. Now it ends with a sentence. The workers are dismissed. Some will return to their villages, others to new projects. You linger for a moment, running your hand through the dry sand at your feet. Beneath it lies the faint trickle of what might have been a river. When you finally turn away, the wind rises behind you. By morning, it will have filled the shallow channels. Within weeks, the desert will reclaim the land entirely. The pharaoh's dream will vanish, leaving only a faint scar visible from above, a memory written in earth. And yet, even failure leaves its trace. Centuries later, another ruler, Darius of Persia, will find this same stretch of land. He will read the old inscriptions left by Necho's engineers and attempt to finish what the Egyptian began. He will dig deeper, reach further, and for a time, water will indeed flow from the Nile to the Red Sea. But even that canal will silt up, forgotten again until modern times. It seems that the desert always wins, eventually. You look back one last time before leaving the site. The horizon glows with the red of sunset. The air is still. Somewhere in the distance, the Nile glimmers faintly, indifferent to the pharaoh's failed ambition. For now, the canal lies silent, a monument not of triumph, but of endurance. You wonder when the pharaoh dreams of eternity, does he understand how quickly the sands forget? The wind has changed again. More than 2,000 years have passed since Pharaoh Necho II ordered the first trench carved into the desert floor. Empires have risen and fallen like the tides he once tried to command. The Persians, the Greeks, the Romans, the Caliphs, all have crossed this same land, gazed across the dunes, and imagined water where there was none. And each in their turn, returned to the same idea, a canal between seas. If you were to walk along that ancient route now, you would see fragments of all those eras layered together. The sand hides little ridges of ancient embankment, broken pottery, smooth stones once cut for retaining walls, bits of brick stamped with long-dead kings' names, a line that stretches roughly from Bubastis to the Bitter Lakes, and onward toward the Red Sea. A faint scar in the desert, running parallel to eternity itself. The locals in later centuries simply call it Al-Qanat al-Qadima, the Old Canal. They do not remember Necho by name, nor Darius, nor the countless workers who sweated into that soil, but they know that the desert once flowed with water. And perhaps that is enough. When Alexander the Great marched into Egypt in 32 BCE, he found a land weary of empire, but still rich in memory. The Persians had left behind their stele proclaiming their triumphs, but their canal, Necho's canal, was already half buried again. The Macedonian conqueror looked upon the same horizon, the same unending stretch of sand, and considered its potential. He had no time to finish it. His ambitions stretched too far, his life too brief. But his successors, the Ptolemies, took an interest. The Ptolemies were practical rulers, Greek by heritage, but Egyptian by necessity. They inherited the old dreams of pharaohs and translated them into their own tongue. They repaired sections of the ancient waterway to link the Nile with a new city they built on the Mediterranean coast, Alexandria. This was not Necho's canal exactly, but a descendant of it, a hybrid of old and new ambitions. Ships could now travel from the Nile to Alexandria, carrying grain, stone, papyrus and glass to the world beyond the horizon. Egypt, once again, became the middle of everything, a crossroads of trade, empire, and myth. And yet, even then, the idea of the desert canal still whispered to the engineers and philosophers of the age. Strabo, the Greek geographer, wrote that an ancient channel once reached the Red Sea, but was abandoned when rulers feared the salt water would ruin the Nile's purity. Others said the gods themselves cursed the effort. In the writings of Herodotus, Necho's canal appears not as failure, but as warning. A story about the limits of human ambition. But time has a way of dulling warnings. When Rome conquered Egypt in 30 BCE, they inherited everything: the temples, the taxes, and the ghosts. The Romans too studied the old canal's remains. Julius Caesar himself is said to have considered its reopening. He was not the first Roman to dream of connecting the Mediterranean to the Red Sea. Others before him imagined a route through the Nile's eastern branches. But Caesar's engineers faced the same dilemma that had plagued Necho and Darius: the difference in elevation between the two seas. If the canal were cut too deep, they feared, seawater from the Red Sea might flood into the Nile Valley, turning Egypt's farmland into a salt marsh. For a civilization that depended entirely on the Nile's freshwater rhythm, that was unthinkable. And so, once again, the dream was postponed. The Romans did, however, repair and expand the sections that reached the Bitter Lakes. They used the canal for limited transport, moving stone, grain, and troops along its surviving stretches. For a few more generations, it served quietly, neither glorious nor forgotten. It was, perhaps, the most fitting fate for such a project. Not a monument to empire, but a tool for the ordinary. Centuries later, under the early Islamic Caliphate, the old canal would see life again. When Amr ibn al-As conquered Egypt in the 7th century CE, he found the remnants of the Roman system still visible. The Caliph Umar ibn al-Khattab ordered its restoration, not for conquest, but for compassion. A famine had struck Arabia, and the Caliph wished to send grain from Egypt across the Red Sea to his people. The canal was repaired, cleaned, and renamed Nahar Amir al-Mu'minin, the river of the commander of the faithful. For nearly a century, water and boats once again crossed the desert, carrying food and goods between the Nile and the Red Sea. The route that Necho had envisioned became real, if only briefly. But history repeats itself like the wind. By the 8th century, new political tensions led the next caliph to close the canal, fearing it might be used by enemies to invade Egypt. The waterway was blocked deliberately with earth and stone. The desert reclaimed it one last time. And so, for 1,000 years, the canal lay silent once more. Centuries later, European explorers, traders, cartographers, and scholars began to rediscover the ancient records. They found the writings of Herodotus, Diodorus, and Strabo. They compared their accounts with what they saw in the desert: faint channels, scattered stones, traces of embankments that did not follow any natural river. Napoleon Bonaparte's engineers, during the French campaign in Egypt 1798-1801, studied the same ground. They took measurements, drew maps, and declared that the ancients had, in fact, attempted to join the Nile and the Red Sea. They even found, by accident, that the two seas were not as dangerously unequal in height as once believed. Necho had not been entirely wrong. The French plans inspired new dreams, dreams that would eventually become the modern Suez Canal. completed in 1869, under Ferdinand de Lesseps. When the French engineers broke ground, they discovered portions of the old channel. Some sections, they realized, had followed nearly the same path their modern surveyors had chosen. It was as if, across millennia, the ghosts of Necko's engineers had left behind a map. The modern canal succeeded where all others had failed. It did not merely carry water, it carried the world's ships, the world's commerce, the world's politics. And yet, buried beneath that achievement, lay the bones and dreams of those who had come before. Necko's name resurfaced in scholarly journals, no longer as a failed dreamer, but as a visionary centuries ahead of his time. His path of the waters, as his inscriptions called it, was no longer seen as folly. It was the first step in a project that took humanity 2,500 years to finish. And what of the workers, the nameless thousands who carried the earth, who sweated and died beneath the desert sun? Their memory does not appear in any monument. No stela bears their names. Yet they were the true architects of the dream. Every canal, every ship, every stretch of progress that followed stands upon their labor. Archaeologists have found traces of their camps near Wadi Tumilat, broken pots, fire pits, simple tools, nothing grand, nothing royal, just the residue of survival. And in that simplicity lies the real story of the canal. Not a tale of kings, but of endurance. When you imagine them now, those men and women standing in the shimmering heat, you realize that they were never truly forgotten. The world they built for another's glory eventually became part of the world we live in. Their persistence carried forward through time, even when their canal did not. They were, in a sense, the first modern workers, ordinary people, engaged in an extraordinary project that none of them would see completed, but all of them would help begin. Stand now, once more, in your mind's eye, upon the desert that stretches between the Nile and the Red Sea. The air is still, the light bends over the dunes. You can almost hear the faint sound of tools striking earth, echoing across time. If you look closely, you might see a line in the sand, barely visible, but unmistakable. It is the ghost of Necko's canal, winding its way toward the horizon. The modern Suez Canal, only a few dozen miles to the east, glimmers like a mirror. Ships move silently across its surface, their reflections trembling in the heat. You can almost imagine that they are sailing along the same course the pharaoh once envisioned. And perhaps, in a way, they are. The desert keeps no grudges. It buries everything but the idea itself. The idea that water can cross land, that effort can shape nature, that dreams, no matter how futile, can ripple across time. When the wind blows across the old canal's path, it carries not sorrow, but continuity. It whispers the same message that Necko, Darius, Caesar, and de Lesseps all somehow understood. That progress is never a straight line, but a long, slow curve that bends through history. The pharaoh's dream was not lost. It was simply waiting. And when at last the waters did flow through the desert, centuries later, they carried more than ships. They carried memory. You might ask yourself then, as you watch the sun set over that endless horizon, was Necko's canal ever truly a failure? Or was it simply the first whisper of a promise that humanity would spend millennia learning how to keep? The air smells of salt and dust. The horizon shimmers in layers of pale heat, each one trembling like the surface of water that isn't there. You are standing at the edge of the Sahara, in the 3rd century BCE, where the land of Carthage meets the great emptiness of Africa's interior. Before you stretches a road that isn't truly a road at all, only faint tracks carved by the endless procession of feet, hooves, and wheels. This is the Tariq al-Milh, the salt road. Here, where the desert begins, salt is not a seasoning. It is wealth. It is power. It is life itself. The Carthaginians call it white gold, and in the world of ancient trade, its worth rivals that of precious metals. You can almost see it glittering in the distance, massive white slabs stacked in neat rows near the coastal warehouses, waiting to be loaded onto wagons. Some will go north to the farms that feed Carthage's growing empire. Others will go south, deep into the desert, where it will be traded for gold dust, ivory, ostrich feathers, and, most coveted of all, human lives. The desert may look empty, but it hums with commerce. In the bustling port city itself, the salt begins its journey. Carthage, mistress of the western Mediterranean, rises proudly from the shore, its double harbor shaped like an open mouth, its docks lined with ships bearing the insignia of the great merchant houses. From above, the city gleams in the sun, red-tiled roofs, whitewashed walls, and the constant sound of hammering, shouting, and the cries of gulls. The scent of fish and olive oil mixes with the sharp tang of brine. Carthaginian merchants are everywhere, tall, robed figures with bronze coins stitched into their belts, arguing in Punic, Greek, or Latin. They talk of trade routes that stretch farther than most men can imagine, across the sea to Sicily and Spain, across the desert to the mysterious lands beyond the dunes. In the great marketplace, beneath the shadow of the Temple of Tanit, salt is weighed with care. Each block, carved from the coastal pans of Tunisia, is inspected for purity and shape. The best is hard and white, glittering faintly in the sunlight. Lesser grades, grey or powdery, are packed separately, destined for the city's fish-curing sheds or dyeing vats. Carthage lives by trade, and trade lives by precision. Every shipment of salt carries not only its weight, but its promise, the promise of exchange. From the docks, caravans assemble. They gather near the southern gate, where the stone roads give way to dust. There are hundreds of them, camels, oxen, donkeys, and men. Each caravan will travel hundreds of miles across the desert, a journey that will last months. The men who lead them, the Mishalin, as they are called, are not Carthaginian by birth. They are Berbers, desert people who have known these sands since before the city existed. They are the intermediaries, the invisible bridge between empire and emptiness. You watch as they prepare for departure, loading the camels with bundles of salt wrapped in palm fiber, stacking clay jars of water, checking the straps and harnesses again and again. The desert tolerates no mistakes. By evening, the caravans set out, their silhouettes stretched long against the sinking sun. The sound of the city fades behind them, replaced by the deep silence of sand. The desert is not a single landscape. It is a succession of trials. The first days are easy. Low dunes, firm ground, the faint outline of shrubs. The men walk beside their camels, guiding them along invisible routes marked by stars and memory. At dawn, the horizon turns gold at noon. It blazes white by dusk. It cools into violet shadows. The rhythm of travel is slow, deliberate, and almost hypnotic. Each step must be measured, each sip of water accounted for. The caravans move like a living organism, resting at the same times, rising with the same signal. At night, the desert comes alive. The heat fades, replaced by a chill that bites through cloth and bone. Fires are lit, small and flickering. Men huddle around them, eating flatbread and dates. The camels groan softly in the dark, their eyes reflecting the starlight. The stars are more than decoration here. They are direction. The Berber guides know each constellation by name, each star's rising and setting. They navigate by the heavens as sailors do at sea. To lose sight of the stars is to risk death. On the seventh day, the landscape changes. The dunes grow taller, the air drier. The salt packs begin to sweat from the heat, the edges softening. To protect them, the men wrap the bundles tighter, covering them with cloth soaked in oil. The The salt must survive the journey, for it is their profit, their survival, their reputation. There are other dangers too. Sandstorms appear without warning. Walls of dust that roll across the horizon like waves. When they come, the caravan stops. The men drop to the ground and the camels kneel. The world vanishes into a brown blur, the wind screaming like an angry god. When the storm passes, there is silence. The men stand, shake the sand from their robes, and continue. You begin to understand why the desert inspires both reverence and fear. It is indifferent, vast, and eternal. To cross it is to submit to something greater than kings or empires. Weeks later, the caravans reach the edge of the Fezzan, deep in modern-day Libya. Here lies the crossroads of the Sahara, a place where trade routes converge from the east, west, and south. The oasis town is small but alive with activity. Wells lined with stone provide sweet water, and date palms sway gently in the hot wind. Traders from the south, dark-skinned men from lands beyond the desert, wait here with their goods. Their caravans carry ivory, ostrich feathers, spices, and nuggets of gold wrapped in animal skin. They speak a dozen languages, none of which you recognize. The exchange begins with ceremony. The Carthaginian agents lay out their blocks of salt, polished and gleaming. The southern traders place their gold beside it. There are no fixed scales here, only a shared ritual of trust and repetition. Each side withdraws, allowing the other to approach. If one party is satisfied, they take what they desire and leave something more in return. If not, they walk away. No words are spoken, only gestures, glances, and the silent understanding of commerce in a place where survival depends on fairness. To an outsider, it might seem strange that men from opposite worlds can trade without speech or violence. But here, among the dunes, trust is currency. When the exchange is complete, the Carthaginian agent records it carefully on a wax tablet. 6 slabs of salt, 1 bag of gold dust, 1 bundle of ivory tusks. Each transaction, however small, feeds the empire. The caravans turn back north, heavier now with gold and goods. Their journey home is slower, burdened by weight and fatigue. Some men fall ill and are buried in shallow graves marked by stones. Others vanish into sandstorms, their names lost forever. But enough survive to make it back. When they reach Carthage again, months later, the city welcomes them like heroes. The salt that left the city returns as gold. The warehouses fill, the temples receive their offerings, and the merchants grow richer. The city itself thrives on this rhythm: export, exchange, return. Carthage becomes the beating heart of a trade network that spans half the known world. Its wealth builds fleets, its fleets build colonies, and its colonies bring more salt, more goods, more power. And yet, beneath the grandeur of its harbors and temples, the city's foundation remains simple: men, camels, and salt. Every block carried through the desert, every grain preserved in heat, every life spent along the road contributes to the invisible thread connecting the Mediterranean to the heart of Africa. Without the salt roads, Carthage would be only another coastal town. With them, it becomes legend. You stand once more at the edge of the desert, watching another caravan depart. The camels sway rhythmically, the men's silhouettes shrinking against the glare. Somewhere beyond the horizon lies the promise of gold and the echo of countless footsteps. The wind rises, carrying with it the faint taste of salt. You wonder, in a world built on trade and trust, which lasts longer, the wealth of empires, or the roads that vanish beneath the sand. The desert is silent, but not empty. When you stand among the dunes at dawn, with the air still cool and the light just beginning to spill across the sand. It is easy to imagine that nothing moves here, that this sea of dust and salt is untouched by human hands. But if you look closer, you will see the faint traces of wheels, the circular hollows where fires once burned, the hard-packed footprints of camels that have passed this way for centuries. This is not wilderness, it is a highway. The Carthaginian salt caravans did not create the desert routes. They inherited them, ancient paths that predate written memory, carved into existence by the tribes who lived at the edges of the Sahara long before any empire claimed them. To understand Carthage's power, you must first understand those who walked the roads before them. The Berbers, or Amazigh as they call themselves, were not builders of cities or conquerors of lands. They were guides, traders, and survivors. To the Carthaginians, they were indispensable. Their knowledge of the desert was both practical and sacred. Each dune had a name, each oasis, a story. They could smell the faintest hint of water beneath dry soil, read the shifting patterns of the wind, and recognize from the shape of a footprint whether it belonged to friend or raider. For centuries, they had traded with the peoples of the Sahel, exchanging salt for gold and copper for grain. When Carthage rose as a maritime power, the Berbers became the unseen backbone of its inland trade. Carthaginian merchants may have financed the expeditions and profited from the gold, but it was Berber hands that led the camels, Berber eyes that watched the horizon, and Berber songs that echoed through the night as the caravans rested beneath the stars. A Berber caravan master might have known little of politics, but he knew the desert's temperament, its cruelty and generosity, its silence and storms. He knew, too, that the desert was always listening. And perhaps that is why the Berbers spoke little when they traveled. They saved their words for the oases. If the desert was an ocean, the oases were its islands. Scattered across the Sahara, they formed a fragile chain of life, each one a sanctuary of shade and water where caravans could rest and trade. In these small pockets of fertility, palm trees grew tall and dense. Their fronds cast trembling shadows on the ground, where gardens of barley, dates, and vegetables thrived in carefully managed irrigation channels. Beneath the surface, a network of wells reached down to ancient aquifers, cold, dark rivers trapped below the sands. At night, fires burned in the open squares of the oasis villages. Travelers gathered to share food and stories, exchanging news from the coast and the interior. The Berbers told tales of spirits who guarded the dunes, while the Carthaginians spoke of the sea, which most desert men had never seen. Each oasis was also a market. Goods were unpacked and displayed on mats: salt blocks, jars of oil, ivory, bundles of cloth, and the occasional caged bird brought from the jungles of the south. Negotiations were slow, deliberate, and often wordless. A block of salt might buy a goat. 2 blocks, a small bag of gold dust. 10, a slave, a living being turned into part of the empire's arithmetic. And when morning came, the caravans loaded up again, vanishing into the dunes as the horizon shimmered with heat. From the outside, Carthage appeared to control this vast network with precision, every caravan licensed, every shipment taxed. But in truth, the empire's power was more suggestion than domination. Carthage did not govern the desert it negotiated with it. Its authority extended as far as its merchants could travel safely and no farther. Beyond the last outpost, power shifted to the Berber clans, and beyond them, to the desert kingdoms whose names were whispered but rarely written down. One such kingdom was Garamantia, located deep in the Fezzan region in what is now southwestern Libya. The Garamantes were neither coastal nor nomadic. They built towns of stone and mud, and beneath their lands they dug a network of underground channels, fogaras, to bring water from distant aquifers. They were, in their way, a desert empire. Archaeologists would one day find evidence of their cities, Garamar, Zinchekra, and others, with walls, streets, and workshops. Their people farmed dates and millet, kept cattle, and crafted intricate jewelry of gold and silver. To the Carthaginians, the Garamantes were both partners and mystery. They supplied ivory, slaves, and exotic goods, but rarely allowed foreign merchants to enter their cities. Instead, they met at the edges of their territory, where the salt roads converged. The Garamantes knew the value of isolation. Their power depended on it. In the great city by the sea, the desert seemed like another world. The merchants of Carthage worked with ledgers and contracts, not stars and dunes. Their offices were lined with scrolls written in Punic script, their tables littered with tablets showing lists of goods and quantities. Salt was not white and glittering here. It was a line in an account, a symbol of profit and exchange. But even within this web of bureaucracy, there were moments of quiet wonder. Every time a caravan returned from the interior, it brought with it not just goods but stories. Of black rivers that flowed through green forests, of cities built of mud and gold, of kings who wore bracelets of ivory and crowns of feathers. Few in Carthage believed these stories, but they listened all the same. In time, these tales would spread across the Mediterranean. Greek historians, hearing second-hand accounts from Carthaginian traders, wrote of the mysterious lands beyond the desert, the Aethiopia Ultima, where the sun was closer to the earth and men lived in abundance. And so, even as Carthage fought wars with Rome and Greece, its merchants kept sending caravans southward, searching for the source of the gold that glinted faintly in their coins. Salt was, in every sense, the foundation of this invisible empire. In the humid coastal cities, salt preserved fish and meat. In the dry interior, it preserved life itself, preventing dehydration, balancing the body in the punishing heat. The irony was that Carthage, surrounded by the sea, could not simply use seawater for its salt. It required vast evaporation pans, laborers to scrape and dry the crystals, and merchants to transport them inland. Each block that left the coast carried with it an entire system of labor: the workers who harvested it, the carpenters who built the wagons, the sailors who brought tools and wood from other shores. Even boredom was profitable. The monotony of the desert road, the endless plodding of camels and creaking of leather, was the quiet sound of empire in motion. To the Carthaginians, this was stability. To the Berbers, it was survival. To the Garamantes, it was balance. Each group depended on the other, even if they never spoke the same tongue. Power, like trade, follows roots. The Carthaginian Senate understood this well. In times of peace, they taxed the salt caravans lightly, encouraging expansion. But when war loomed, as it often did with the rising Republic of Rome, they increased the duties, seeking revenue for ships and soldiers. The Berbers resented these changes. They had little interest in Rome or war. Their wealth came from movement, not conquest. Yet Carthage's conflicts disrupted their trade, forcing caravans to delay or reroute. Some Berber tribes rebelled quietly, refusing to transport salt for Carthaginian merchants. Others struck deals with rival powers. The desert, it seemed, did not care for loyalty. It cared for survival. Still, the flow of salt never truly stopped. It slowed, shifted, changed course, but like the wind itself, it adapted. And somewhere in the middle of the 2nd century BCE, as Carthage struggled against Rome in its final war, caravans still left the southern gate, still carried their white cargo through the dunes, still reached the oases where gold waited in silence. Empires might burn, but the salt roads endured. Centuries later, when Carthage lay in ruins, its walls pulled down, its people scattered, the desert remained untouched. Travelers still found the old paths, faint but unbroken. The oases still stood, their palms swaying over the same wells that had quenched the thirst of merchants and camels alike. Even when Rome rose in Carthage's place, the trade continued under new names and new masters. The salt still moved, the gold still gleamed. It is said that the desert forgets nothing. Somewhere, buried beneath centuries of sand, lie the broken remnants of salt blocks that once bore Carthaginian marks, faint symbols of an empire that lived by trade and perished by fire. And yet, in a strange way, it never truly died. Its roads, its roots, its rhythms, they persisted, invisible but eternal, pulsing through Africa like veins of memory. Now, standing once more beneath the desert stars, you look south. The horizon is dark, but you know that beyond it lies another world, a world of rivers, forests, and kingdoms rich in gold. You wonder how far did the salt roads truly go, and how much of Carthage's forgotten wealth still lies buried beneath the dunes. Now, standing once more beneath the desert stars, you look south. The horizon is dark, but you know that beyond it lies another world, a world of rivers, forests, and kingdoms rich in gold. You wonder how far did the salt roads truly go, and how much of Carthage's forgotten wealth still lies buried beneath the dunes, waiting for someone to find it again. The year is 146 BCE. The sky over Carthage is black with smoke. The salt that once meant wealth now falls from Roman hands, not traded, but sown. Grain by grain, it is scattered across the earth where the city once stood, cursed to never yield again. The sound of fire drowns out the sea. Yet far away, beyond the edge of empire, the desert remains silent. The caravans still move. The salt still glitters under the sun. Even as Carthage burns, its lifelines endure, the ancient roots that stretch southward into the vastness of the Sahara, carrying not armies or merchants now, but memory. When Rome conquered Carthage, the city was reduced to ashes. Its merchants were enslaved or scattered, its ledgers burned. But trade does not die easily, especially not in a land where survival itself depends on exchange. The Berber guides, who had always moved between worlds, continued their journeys. To them, Carthage had been a partner, not a master. When it vanished, the trade simply shifted, its centers of gravity moving inland, away from the ruins and toward new ports under Roman and Numidian rule. The Romans cared little for the desert. They preferred the stability of cities, the predictability of farms and tax rolls. Yet even they recognized the value of salt. Soon, Roman administrators along the African coast began to record strange entries in their accounts. Salt delivered from the interior, quantity unknown, source unspecified. They did not realize they were describing the survival of the old Carthaginian system, the ghost of the salt roads still pulsing through the sands. Every few months, traders from the interior would appear at Roman markets. Tall, dark-skinned men, wearing robes of rough cotton, leading camels laden with slabs of salt and bundles of gold dust. They would sell their goods, buy tools and cloth, and vanish again. No one knew their names, but they carried the echo of an empire that refused to disappear. In the centuries that followed, new powers rose and fell, but the desert remained constant. By the 1st century CE, the Garamantes, once trading partners of Carthage, had become a regional power. Their underground irrigation channels expanded for miles, feeding fields of dates and barley in what seemed an impossible landscape. They no longer relied on Carthaginian intermediaries. Instead, they controlled the trade directly, sending their own caravans north to Roman towns and south toward the great inland kingdoms. The Roman geographer Pliny the Elder wrote of them with both fascination and unease. The Garamantes are a people who till the earth by means of subterranean waters. They wage war upon the troglodytes, driving them from the desert by means of four-horse chariots. To the Romans, they were both exotic and threatening, proof that civilization could exist in the very heart of the sands. The Garamantes taxed the caravans that crossed their lands. They built way stations and wells, fortified settlements and stone towers. In doing so, they transformed the salt roads into a kind of nation, not of walls and borders, but of movement and exchange. Even the Romans, pragmatic as they were, learned to respect this invisible empire. South of the Garamantes, across hundreds of miles of desert, the salt roads reached new kingdoms, Ghana, Mali, and Songhai, long before Europe would know their names. There, in the lands beyond the desert, gold was abundant, but salt was scarce. The air was humid, the rivers warm, and sweat leached salt from the body faster than it could be replaced. Without it, people weakened and died. And so, caravans from the north arrived like lifelines, bringing slabs of salt from the Sahara to exchange for gold dust from the Niger River Valley. The exchange was nearly perfect. Weight for weight, substance for substance. The desert, in its quiet way, had bound two worlds together. Even centuries after Carthage's fall, its spirit lived in these exchanges. The careful balance of trade, the faith in routes unseen, the quiet movement of goods that shaped entire civilizations. When Arab traders eventually began to cross the Sahara in the early Middle Ages, they found the old Carthaginian roads still in use, their waypoints unchanged, their logic intact. They called them the Turuq al-Milh, the roads of salt. For every merchant who profited, there were hundreds who labored unseen. The salt blocks themselves were cut by hand, in great slabs, from mines and pans scattered across North Africa, at places like Tagaza, Bilma, and Taoudeni. There, men worked in suffocating heat, hacking at the glittering earth until their hands bled. The air was thick with brine and dust. Their pay was meager, a handful of dates, perhaps a corner of the salt they mined. The work was monotonous, painful, and endless. But even this drudgery held a strange dignity. The men who cut the salt knew that without them, no caravan could move, no trade could exist, no empire could rise. Their lives were short, their names forgotten, but their labor built the foundations of a world economy. When you think of Carthage's gleaming harbors, remember that they were mirrored by the glare of the desert mines, where men carved white wealth from the ground until the sun itself seemed to burn their bones. Archaeologists who walk these deserts today still find the traces of those ancient roots. In the Fezzan, you can see faint lines of stone, barely rising above the sand, that once marked the edges of caravan paths. In some places, small cairns, stacks of rock still stand, placed centuries ago as markers to guide travelers through the endless dunes. They lead to ruins, the remains of Garamantian towns, their walls half buried but still proud. You can walk through the old streets and imagine the sound of markets, the creak of leather, the murmur of traders counting salt blocks and weighing gold. Every ruin tells the same quiet story, that power fades, but roots remain. Carthage may be gone, its stones scattered, but the desert holds its memory. It holds it not in monuments or inscriptions, but in something more enduring. The faint, persistent paths carved by countless footsteps. Even when the sand covers them, they are still there, invisible but eternal. Perhaps what made the salt roads unique was not their commerce, but their quiet. Unlike the noisy bustle of ports and cities, the desert taught a different rhythm, slow, patient, almost meditative. The men who traveled those roads learned to think in days, not hours in horizons, not distances. Their lives were measured not by events, but by movement, the endless repetition of dawn and dusk, of steps and stars. To live on the salt road was to surrender to monotony and to find meaning within it. The same rhythm shaped empires and memories alike. The wealth of Carthage was built on repetition, block after block, trade after trade, year after year. The desert was its ledger, written in silence. And in that silence, there is a kind of peace. When you listen to the wind over the dunes, it sounds almost like the whisper of countless voices, traders, guides, and workers long dead, their words worn smooth by centuries of sand. They remind you that history is not only war and conquest. Sometimes, it is the slow, deliberate act of carrying salt through the desert. By the time medieval Europe began to rise from its dark centuries, the salt trade of the Sahara had reached its height. Cities like Timbuktu and Gao became centers of wealth, built on the same principle that had once enriched Carthage, the exchange of white gold for yellow. The knowledge of navigation, the methods of preserving food, the art of desert travel, all had their roots in the old Carthaginian networks. The salt roads were not only economic paths, but corridors of culture, language, and belief. And so, long after Carthage's name had faded from maps, its influence lived on, not in its ruins, but in the continuity of movement across the desert. The Romans had thought they destroyed the city forever, but no fire can burn the horizon. In time, Rome too fell. The roads crumbled, the harbors silted over, but the desert remained unchanged. Even now, more than 2 millennia later, in the salt flats of Tunisia and Libya, workers still cut blocks by hand, drying them in the same sun that once baked the caravan's path. Camels still carry the loads to small markets, where traders weigh them by sight, not by scale. The rhythm continues. It is slow, repetitive, and, to some, boring. Yet in that boredom lies continuity, and in that continuity, civilization endures. Salt, so simple, so ordinary, binds past and present in a way few things can. The wind shifts again. You close your eyes and taste the salt on your lips. Somewhere beyond the dunes, the ghost of a caravan moves still, its camels swaying in silence, its men walking patiently beneath a sun that has never cooled. You think of Carthage, of its harbors, its merchants, its forgotten workers, and the invisible empire that once spanned from the sea to the sands. And you wonder, perhaps the true legacy of Carthage was not its wars or wealth, but the quiet endurance of those who kept walking, long after the city itself was gone. You wait to the sound of hammers. It is the summer of 214 BCE, and the island city of Syracuse, jewel of Sicily, crossroads of the ancient Mediterranean, hums with the noise of war. The harbor smells of pitch and salt, and from the high walls overlooking the sea, you can see Roman ships gathering like storm clouds on the horizon. But inside the city, another kind of storm is building. Not of soldiers or generals, but of thinkers. At the heart of this city lives an old man who has little interest in war, politics, or even Rome itself. His name is Archimedes of Syracuse, and though the world remembers him as a mathematician, his city will soon know him as something far stranger. A man who turned numbers into weapons. Syracuse at this time is not just a city, it is a statement. Founded by Greek settlers centuries earlier, it grew into one of the wealthiest cities of the ancient world. Its marble temples gleam in the sun, its theaters echo with music, and its harbors are filled with merchant ships from Carthage, Egypt, and Rome. To walk its streets is to hear a dozen languages. Olive oil, grain, and fine cloth move through its markets, and philosophers argue beneath colonnades, while soldiers polish their spears nearby. But beauty attracts envy. Syracuse sits in the middle of the Mediterranean, a prize both Rome and Carthage desire. During the Second Punic War, when the Roman Republic and Carthaginian Empire are locked in brutal conflict, Syracuse tries to remain neutral, and then, disastrously, chooses the wrong side. After the death of King Hiero II, who had long kept peace with Rome, his successor Hieronymus allies with Carthage. The decision is both bold and fatal. Within months, Rome sends its legions to besiege the city. And thus begins one of the strangest, most brilliant sieges in history, where the fate of a city will rest not only on swords and ships, but on the mind of a mathematician. Archimedes is 70 years old. His beard is long, his robe simple, his sandals worn. He does not care for titles or ceremonies. He spends most of his days surrounded by wax tablets, sand diagrams, and strange contraptions made of wood and bronze. When the siege begins, the city's generals visit him in his workshop, a low, sunlit room overlooking the sea. They ask him for help. Not advice, not theory, but defense. Archimedes sighs. He has spent his life studying the universe, circles, spheres, levers, and numbers that describe the movement of the stars. To him, war is a crude interruption, an unnecessary chaos. Yet he cannot refuse. Syracuse is his home. And the Romans are at the gates. So, reluctantly, he turns his mind to war. "Give me a lever long enough," he once said, "and I will move the world." Now, he will move armies. At first, the soldiers do not understand what Archimedes is building. His designs look like puzzles, beams and pulleys, counterweights and ropes, wheels turning wheels. But when assembled, they transform the city's walls into something formidable. He builds catapults of different ranges, small ones for close combat, massive ones for distant ships. He calculates trajectories and angles, adjusting for the curvature of the earth and the resistance of the air. When the Roman fleet approaches, his machines answer. From the walls, great stones arc through the sky, landing among the ships with terrifying precision. The Romans, expecting a simple siege, are met instead by geometry. Archimedes has invented an invisible army of mathematics. The Roman generals, Marcus Claudius Marcellus and Appius Claudius Pulcher, are experienced commanders. They have seen cities burn and walls crumble. But Syracuse bewilders them. Every time they attempt to move siege engines close to the walls, they are struck by hidden weapons. Archimedes' smaller catapults, clever compact designs that can be operated by one or two men, unleash volleys of stones and darts that shatter armor and shields. His larger machines, hidden behind the battlements, fling heavy boulders with such force that entire siege towers collapse. The Romans soon learn to fear the silence between volleys. Plutarch later wrote, "So great and marvelous was Archimedes' skill in mechanical devices, that he caused the Romans to believe that Syracuse was defended by the gods, not by men." The soldiers begin to whisper his name as a curse. But Archimedes is not finished. He designs one final weapon, something the Romans will speak of for centuries. At night, along the sea wall, his assistants construct what looks like a giant crane. From it hangs a chain with a great iron hook or claw. When Roman ships approach the walls, the crane swings out over the water. The claw grips the prow of a ship and, through a system of pulleys and counterweights, lifts it partially into the air. Then, with a sudden release, it drops the ship, capsizing it. To the soldiers on the wall, it looks like the sea itself is devouring the enemy. The Romans, terrified, withdraw from the harbor. They begin attacking only at night, hoping to hide from the unseen machines that haunt the daylight. Archimedes, meanwhile, returns to his workroom, exhausted but calm. He writes equations on a wax tablet, murmuring to himself. For him, each machine is not a weapon but a proof, a demonstration of principle. The generals call him a genius. He calls it simple balance. There is one more story, whispered centuries later, that Archimedes built a device that burned Roman ships using mirrors. According to the legend, he aligned polished bronze shields to reflect the sun's light, focusing it into beams that set the wooden ships aflame. Historians debate whether this truly happened. Experiments in later centuries, by scientists and even television shows, have shown that it might be possible. but unlikely in the chaos of battle. Still, the idea persists because it feels true in spirit. Archimedes, the man who found numbers in the stars, might well have turned sunlight into a weapon. Whether real or myth, it captures the essence of the siege, a city defended, not by brute force, but by thought. As months pass, the siege drags on. The Romans surround the city by land and sea, cutting off supplies. Hunger begins to spread. Inside the walls, life continues in strange rhythm. Soldiers repair weapons, women grind grain, children play in courtyards now shadowed by catapults. And in his workshop, Archimedes works still, not for glory, but for understanding. He writes treatises on geometry and mechanics, as though the siege outside were only a distraction. He studies the shapes of spirals, the principle of buoyancy, the curve of parabolas. Some nights, he walks the walls, gazing out over the quiet sea, where the Roman ships float like dark islands. He knows the city cannot hold forever. No invention can stop time. Yet he continues. For Archimedes, every problem, even war, is a puzzle, and puzzles must be solved. By the second year of the siege, the Romans change their tactics. They stop attacking the walls and begin to wait. Supplies inside Syracuse dwindle. Disease spreads. The defenders grow weary. Even Archimedes begins to tire. His hands shake when he draws diagrams. His assistants whisper that the great man is growing old. Still, the city holds. For 2 years, the Roman Republic, master of armies, is held at bay by one man's intellect. And yet, as the story will soon show, intellect alone cannot save a city forever. The Romans are patient. The sea does not sleep. And in the silence before the final assault, as the winds shift over the harbor and the catapults creak softly in the dark, you can almost hear Archimedes whispering to himself, tracing shapes in the sand, chasing an answer that even now eludes him. You wonder when the mind becomes a weapon. Does it protect civilization, or merely teach war to think? You awaken to silence. The hammers are gone. The laughter that once drifted across the marble courtyards of Syracuse has faded. The harbor lies still, its waters smooth and cold beneath the autumn sun. It has been nearly 2 years since the siege began. Rome still waits beyond the walls, patient and calculating, while within, the people of Syracuse are learning a slower kind of warfare, the war of waiting. There are no great battles now, only small, desperate choices. Inside Syracuse, the streets are quieter than ever. The city that once traded silk and spices now barters for barley and salt. The wealthy, who once reclined in mosaic halls, now send servants to line up for stale bread. The soldiers who guard the walls grow thinner each week, their armor hanging loose on their shoulders. And still, from time to time, a Roman arrow finds its way over the walls, a silent messenger from the enemy. When it lands, no one moves at first. Everyone listens for the sound it makes. If it strikes wood, it is ignored. If it strikes flesh, the silence deepens. The siege has turned the city inward. Every man and woman lives within the boundaries of endurance, measuring their strength against the slow passage of hunger. Even Archimedes feels it now. Archimedes, now in his 72nd year, continues his work, though his steps have grown slower. His workshop, once filled with students and assistants, is mostly empty. Many have joined the soldiers on the walls, others have fled or fallen ill. Each morning, he walks to his table by the window, where the light falls across a board of sand. With a stick, he draws shapes, circles, spirals, triangles, then erases them and begins again. He murmurs as he works, tracing invisible arcs, muttering equations only he understands. To him, this is prayer. He is said to have once leapt from a bath, shouting Eureka! Oh! When he discovered the principle of buoyancy. Now there are no shouts, only whispers, calculations and sighs. Occasionally, a messenger from the city's generals visits, seeking new devices, new means of defense. But the old man only shakes his head. The city needs food, he says softly, not machines. Outside the walls, the Romans wait. Their commander, Marcus Claudius Martellus, is not a man who rushes to victory. He understands the slow art of siegecraft, the way hunger and despair can break a city faster than catapults ever could. He orders his troops to seal every gate, patrol every road, and block every channel into the harbor. Nothing moves in or out. Supplies that once came from Carthage now vanish into the sea. The Carthaginian navy, distracted by its own battles elsewhere, abandons Syracuse to its fate. Martellus, watching from his camp, knows that time is now his greatest ally. Yet even he feels a strange unease. The name Archimedes still lingers among his men, not as a man, but as a legend. They say he can sink ships with mirrors, that he can turn the stars against them, that the walls themselves are alive with his invisible power. Martellus does not believe such things, but he respects the fear they inspire. Fear, after all, is a weapon too. It is early winter when the siege changes. The Romans, seeing the city's lights dim and hearing fewer sentries on the walls, begin to prepare for a renewed assault. They wait for the right moment, a festival night, when the Syracusans, weary of war, allow themselves small joy. The night of Artemis's feast arrives. The streets fill with torches, and for the first time in months, laughter returns. Music echoes faintly from the agora. Wine flows. And that is when the Romans strike. Under cover of darkness, Martellus orders a small detachment of men to scale the walls of the Achradina district, a section near the sea that has grown weakly defended. The soldiers climb in silence, their sandals slick with dew. They expect resistance, but none comes. The guards are drunk or sleeping. By dawn, Roman standards fly above the walls. The siege is over. But Syracuse does not yet know it. When the sun rises, the people of Syracuse wake to find Roman soldiers already inside the city. Confusion spreads faster than fire. Some shout for the defense to rally, others flee toward the harbor. But the harbor too is lost. Roman galleys glide into the water, their oars cutting through the mist. Archimedes, in his home near the city's center, hears the noise but does not move. He is bent over his table, drawing circles in the sand. When a soldier bursts through his door, young, terrified, sword in hand, Archimedes does not look up. The soldier shouts, perhaps in Latin, perhaps in Greek. Archimedes continues his work. "Do not disturb my circles," he says quietly. What happens next is uncertain. Some accounts say the soldier, not recognizing the old man, kills him on the spot. Others say he was struck down by accident, or in anger, or simply because the chaos of conquest leaves no room for mercy. However it occurred, The mind that once moved the world was silenced in a single motion. Archimedes died with the sand still marked beneath his hands. When Martellus learns of Archimedes' death, he is said to have been deeply grieved. He had ordered that the old man be spared, wishing to meet him, perhaps even to invite him to Rome. But orders are brittle things in the heat of victory. Martellus arranges for Archimedes to be buried with honor, and for his house and instruments to be protected. He reportedly sends some of the mathematician's writings to Rome, where they are studied for generations to come. But the city itself, Syracuse, once the shining island of art and thought, is looted. Temples are stripped of gold, homes are burned, and slaves are taken by the thousands. What began as a triumph of intellect ends as a tragedy of conquest. In the years that follow, much of Archimedes' work disappears. His treatises, On Floating Bodies, The Sand Reckoner, On Spirals, The Quadrature of the Parabola, survive only in fragments, copied and recopied by scribes who barely understand them. One of his writings, The Method of Mechanical Theorems, vanishes completely, lost for nearly 2 millennia before being rediscovered in a faded manuscript beneath a prayer text in the 20th century. It revealed that Archimedes had been centuries ahead of his time, using concepts resembling calculus, balancing infinitesimal slices of shapes to measure their volume and area. The same mind that built catapults and cranes had also glimpsed the mathematics that would not be formally understood until Newton and Leibniz. And yet, for all his brilliance, his city still fell. For all his geometry, he could not find the formula for peace. Centuries later, travelers to Sicily would visit the ruins of Syracuse and speak of Archimedes as if he were a myth. They would imagine him standing on the walls, with mirrors catching the sunlight, setting ships aflame, the mind of man conquering the brute force of empire. But others, walking through the quiet streets, would remember a different Archimedes, an old man in a simple room, drawing circles while the city burned outside. Which version, you wonder, is closer to the truth? Was Archimedes the genius who defended a city with thought alone? Or was he the dreamer who could not see that even the most perfect circle ends somewhere? After the fall of Syracuse, Rome's control of Sicily is complete. The island becomes the Republic's first formal province, a land of grain and taxes, not philosophy. The Roman world moves forward, its engineers studying Archimedes' principles, its generals boasting of victory. But the spirit of the old city lingers in its ruins, a quiet testimony to the brief, brilliant moment when thought and war collided. Syracuse becomes a lesson whispered among scholars that intellect can defend, but it cannot conquer that even the purest pursuit of knowledge exists within the shadow of power. And as centuries turn, the story of Archimedes becomes one of those rare tales that live between history and legend, a parable not of victory, but of the fragile balance between wisdom and survival. Now the sea is still again, the walls are crumbling, the harbor silent. The Romans have gone, leaving only dust and silence. But in the sand, faintly visible where the light touches the old workshop, you might still trace a few perfect circles. Circles drawn by a hand that once tried to measure the heavens and found only the small, tragic geometry of the human world. You wonder, was Archimedes' death the end of an age of reason, or merely the beginning of a world where reason must always serve war? The sea has grown quiet again. Centuries have passed since the walls of Syracuse crumbled and the Romans marched through its streets. The catapults have rotted, the cranes have fallen into dust, and the harbor that once burned with fire and invention now lies still beneath the Sicilian sun. But history is an echo, and some echoes never fade. If you walk through the ruins today, overgrown stone, the faint outlines of foundations, fragments of marble buried in sand, you might still feel it. The hum of thought that once filled the air, the whisper of a mind that refused to bow to war. This is the story of what happened after the siege. How a dead man's diagrams outlived his conquerors. How numbers wandered like ghosts through the centuries, and how the quiet persistence of logic shaped the world that followed. When the Roman soldiers looted Syracuse, they did not understand what they carried. They took statues and silver, ivory carvings and bronze urns, and among them, a few rolled scrolls and strange devices of wood and metal. These last items were curiosities, not treasures. Soldiers sold them to merchants, merchants sold them to philosophers. Some of the writings found their way to Rome, where they were examined by men who prided themselves on practicality. The Romans admired engineers, but not dreamers. They built roads, aqueducts, and fortifications. They knew how to weigh, measure, and build. But few could comprehend the kind of mathematics Archimedes had written. Still, a few Roman thinkers tried. The writer Cicero, serving as quaestor in Sicily nearly a century later, visited Archimedes' tomb, already half forgotten, overgrown with weeds. He found it by searching for the carving of a sphere inscribed within a cylinder, the symbol Archimedes had chosen for himself. "I found the tomb," Cicero wrote, and cleared away the bushes that had grown about it. There was the figure of a sphere and a cylinder, and inscriptions scarcely legible. It moved him deeply, not because of its grandeur, but because of its modesty. The man who had terrified Rome's armies was remembered not with glory, but with geometry. After Cicero, the world moved on. Rome expanded, then fractured. Empires rose and fell. The libraries of the ancient world burned, first in Alexandria, then in Constantinople. Scrolls vanished, copied and recopied, until they dissolved into legend. Archimedes' name became a whisper in the margins of manuscripts, a scholar's curiosity, a reference without a source. For over 1,000 years, his mind slept in the dark. It was not until the Arab scholars of the Abbasid Caliphate, men like Al-Khwarizmi, Thabit ibn Qurra, and Al-Hazan, began collecting Greek works in Baghdad, that Archimedes' ideas reawakened. Through careful translation, the words of long-dead Greeks found new life in Arabic. Mathematics, geometry, and mechanics were reborn. The concept of balance, the lever, the principle of displacement, all these passed through the lens of Islamic science and returned, centuries later, to Europe. It is through this thread of transmission, fragile, patient, unbroken, that the old man of Syracuse reached across time to shape the modern world. Among the most mysterious objects ever found from ancient Greece is a corroded piece of bronze pulled from a shipwreck off the island of Antikythera in 1901. At first, it looked like nothing more than a lump of metal. But inside were gears, dozens of them, precisely cut and interlocked. It was, as later analysis showed, an astronomical calculator. A machine that could predict eclipses, track planetary movements, and measure cycles of time. Scholars called it the Antikythera mechanism. And though its exact maker is unknown, its design is unmistakably of Archimedean lineage. The same city, the same era, the same blend of curiosity and craftsmanship that turned ideas into mechanisms. The thought occurs, perhaps the machine was a copy, a descendant, or even an original creation of his lost workshop. If so, then somewhere, hidden beneath centuries of rust, lies the last surviving echo of Archimedes' hands. the gears that turned the heavens themselves. In the year 1906, a Danish historian named Johann Ludvig Heiberg examined a 13th-century Greek prayer book in Constantinople. The book seemed ordinary, its parchment worn and its script faded. But beneath the words of prayer, Heiberg noticed faint traces of older writing, mathematical diagrams, strange symbols, and Greek text that spoke of levers and weights. The manuscript, it turned out, was a palimpsest, a recycled parchment on which an older text had been scraped away to make room for new words. The older text was Archimedes. This single discovery, the Archimedes palimpsest, revealed works thought lost forever, including the method of mechanical theorems. For the first time in nearly 2,000 years, the world saw how Archimedes had reasoned, not by mere geometry, but by imagining levers balancing infinitesimal slices of shapes, anticipating the calculus of motion and change. The clarity of it was astonishing. Where others drew diagrams, Archimedes drew the universe in balance. Where others counted, he weighed. Where others guessed, he proved. And all this from a man who lived before algebra even had a name. The rediscovery of Archimedes' work did not merely add to the history of mathematics, it reshaped it. Historians began to see that the modern discoveries of science, pressure, density, equilibrium, were not modern at all. They were echoes of a man who lived before Caesar's Rome, whose only tools were sand, wood, and imagination. His principle of buoyancy explained why ships float. His study of levers revealed the laws of mechanical advantage. His method of exhaustion became the seed from which calculus grew. Even his fascination with mirrors and light inspired later optics. Every modern bridge, every steam engine, every clock and satellite, they all trace their lineage, in some silent way, to that small workshop overlooking the Sicilian Sea. And yet, Archimedes himself had cared nothing for fame. He had said, long before his death, that he wanted only to understand, not to rule, not to conquer, but to know. In later centuries, the lever became his symbol. It is in essence a paradox made physical. A small force, perfectly placed, can move an enormous weight. It is the simplest of machines, yet the most profound of metaphors. Civilizations rise on the same principle. The ability to use limited strength to achieve vast effect. Knowledge, in its purest form, is leverage. Perhaps that was what Archimedes meant when he said,
Suomi on the Pacific. Is it very much Julia the do sacrifice?
Perhaps that was what Archimedes meant when he said, "Give me a place to stand, and I will move the world." For him, that place was not a battlefield, nor a throne, but a circle drawn in sand. Syracuse today is quiet. The ruins of the Euryalus fortress still stand, their stones worn smooth by centuries of wind. The great amphitheater, once filled with voices, lies empty. But if you climb the old walls and look toward the harbor, you can imagine the siege, the Roman ships in the bay, the cranes reaching down from the battlements, the flash of sunlight on bronze. You can imagine Archimedes himself, standing at the edge of the parapet, watching his machines at work, not with pride, but with resignation. For he must have known even then that every invention can serve both wisdom and destruction. The lever that lifts can also crush. The mirror that illuminates can also burn. The thin line between discovery and devastation has always been drawn by human hands. In every age since, Scholars, engineers, and dreamers have felt Archimedes' presence, not as a saint or a prophet, but as a quiet reminder. A reminder that brilliance does not save us from folly, that the perfection of thought means little without the peace of understanding, that circles, no matter how exact, can never close the chaos of history. When physicists speak of equilibrium, when architects design bridges, when astronomers map the motion of planets, the ghost of Archimedes is there, somewhere in the mathematics, smiling faintly. He has become the still point in the turning world. The idea that pure reason, even amid the madness of war, can endure. Perhaps that is why his story still soothes. It is not the tale of a conqueror or a king, but of an old man who chose curiosity over chaos. His life was quiet, his death abrupt, his influence immeasurable. From the fall of Syracuse came no empire, no new nation, only knowledge. And that, perhaps, is its own kind of triumph. That thought can outlast armies, that geometry can survive fire, that an equation can whisper across 2,000 years and still be understood. In the end, Archimedes did move the world, not by force, but by persistence. The lever was his mind. The fulcrum was time. And the weight he moved was history itself. You close your eyes and imagine him once more. An old man tracing circles in the sand as the city falls. The sea glowing faintly beyond the walls. He pauses, looks up, and smiles faintly, as if he knows something the rest of the world has forgotten. Then he bends again to his work, untroubled, eternal. You wonder, softly, in the silence of history, is it possible that every war, every empire, every victory is only a brief interruption in the slow, infinite geometry of thought?